Hello and welcome back everyone, we Weeb Online, and today I'm gonna continue the story What If Madara Was Sealed Inside Naruto Part 11. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
Night in Konoha. It was a rough night for Sasuke Uchiha. Training with Kakashi-sensei had taken up the majority of the morning, and it had gone rather well. Kakashi informed him that he would teach him new jutsu by teaching him how to use lightning release nature transformation. Lightning-style techniques would help Sasuke speed up his attacks and defense because his jutsu arsenal was heavily attack-focused. Sign him up, sweetie. In fact, he hadn't attempted any jutsu today. Just the fundamental exercises of creating a chakra and attempting to use the simple lightning seal to turn the raw energy into lightning. Although it was difficult, he was seeing results rather rapidly. For Uchiha, even. But when they made the decision to take a lunch break, Sasuke was unlucky enough to run into Sakura, his girlfriend, in the middle of the road. "Where were you this morning? Did you forget you promised to spend the day with me? How come you never tell me your plans? I know you have the finals coming up, but could you really not have spared 10 minutes to come see me? Is training more important than me?" Perhaps it was the hard training in the morning. It might have been an accumulation of feelings that had been going unnoticed. However, his answers to those foolish questions had not been particularly cordial. She didn't care about his daily activities. Yes, for a ninja like him, training is more significant than romance. She had attempted to create a scene in the middle of the street because, of course, she had not liked his answers. Sasuke wasn't entirely sure why he had initially chosen to give Sakura a chance. At the time, he knew very little about her, and she was only interested in his skills and appearance. Hell, though, why not try it? For as long as he could remember, he had avoided girls, but now he wanted to see how bad it could get. Sakura and he were only 13 years old, so he didn't intend for anything significant to happen between them. It was meant to be enjoyable. He wasn't prepared for it to become the focal point of their lives, though, as she desired. Time off, is what he suggested they do. It was something like, "Leave me alone, I don't want you to waste my time seeing you this month when I should be training." He couldn't recall exactly how he had phrased it. Hours later, the poisonous emotions had left him, and as usual, he regretted the harsh words he had used in anger. Instead of turning around and apologizing to her, he had doubled down and hardened his heart after causing her to cry. He was supposed to train and get stronger during this month. He needed to win the Chunin exam finals. He had to get revenge on Clan. He needed to kill his brother. "You don't arrive before that, Sakura." Despite missing his evening training with Kakashi, he made the decision to try to get as much sleep as he could so that he would be prepared for his early training the following day. For what seemed like hours, he lay motionless and closed his eyes, but he was unable to fall asleep. He kept thinking about what he ought to have told Sakura. It was made worse by the cacophonous revelers in the streets beneath his apartment. He threw his pillow against the wall and then made the decision to take a stroll. He just needed to get away from all the loud people, no matter where that was. Surprised that so many people were still up at this hour, he raced across the rooftops of the village. Most likely, everyone who came is here for the Chunin exams. To observe him engage in combat. Well, they ought to think about allowing him to have a restful night's sleep if they wanted to witness a good fight. It was a bone-chilling statement that somehow went right to the heart of him rather than a question. Someone had obviously just called out to him, but he had just landed on a random roof and stopped to catch his breath. As he turned and looked up at the end of the roof, he couldn't help but feel a surge of bloodlust and murderous intent. And there he stood, Gaara of the desert, silhouetted by the gleaming moon behind him, hands raking through his hair. With a delirious voice, the red-haired sand ninja exclaimed, "Mother, look, someone has come to wet my sand with the sweet crimson nectar of." Not even waiting for him to finish, Sasuke took action. He made a list of everything he wanted to do tonight, and fighting Gaara was not on it. He leapt off the rooftop and raced in the other direction, pumping a ton of chakra into his legs. Tonight, let Gaara kill someone else. Crazy. After a while he found himself traveling in a familiar path. He had been going to the clan compound once a week or so to walk around and honor the tragedy that had occurred ever since his clan had been murdered. It had always calmed him rather than fueled his anger. As though his goal was inscribed in stone each time. He was going to get his retribution. Itachi would perish if he lost all of this. To put it mildly, it was nostalgic. He reasoned that he might as well go through now. After seeing Gaara, his heart raced and he needed some calming. For this reason, he was unable to move and let out an inward groan when he saw that iconic blue-haired girl outside the Uchiha compound holding a crystal dagger. "Do you mean me? Really? Was today merely meant to be a miserable day for him? When he saw her dagger turn inward, he restrained himself from leaping away. Not that she was looking at him. She was muttering to herself, laughing now and then, and she was definitely crying uncontrollably. Even at this distance, he could sense the steady shuddering, and as he walked slowly closer, he could just barely see the tears streaming down her cheeks. She had a trembling hand. Was she? She couldn't have possibly. Oh no, all he had wanted was a quiet evening. Hey! Startled, Gurren dropped her dagger and turned to face him. It's obvious that she didn't think anyone would be here tonight. Then why, of all places, was she here? In an attempt to calm himself, he approached her slowly and asked casually, "Why are you outside of the Uchiha clan entrance?" His words caused her to tense, and he realized his instinct had been right. She intended to end her own life. And he had made the decision to stop her for some reason. Gurren, the insane crystal girl who had come dangerously close to death more times than he could remember. Even though he wasn't a Uchiha, the irrational Kunoichi had vowed to kill his brother. Like he was, the Avenger. He thought, it doesn't matter, I guess, as he moved slowly past her in the direction of the clan's entrance. At the moment, she was obviously emotionally unstable. He had to remain steady and compose. Follow me. I want to show you something. In fact, his own clan was massacred in this exact compound not too long ago. This Uchiha soil had seen enough bloodshed. Here he wasn't going to stand by and watch her kill herself. There had been enough death here. He was risking everything. With his hands in his pockets, he entered the compound entrance, breathing more rapidly as his heart raced. She could throw that dagger into his back at any moment. She most likely wanted to, he knew. This was a dumb idea, damn it. Why didn't he simply flee and give her the freedom she desired? 5 steps. 10 steps. To his increasing surprise, no daggers were hurled at him as he continued to walk. Even more unexpected, though, were the soft footsteps he heard behind him on the stone walkway. She was indeed trailing him. He could hear her sniffle and attempt to gather herself every few steps. If he had to speculate, he thought that she was emotionally affected greatly by her defeat to him in the preliminary round. Perhaps that was the real reason he was feeling a little bad. His victory wasn't his fault, still, though. Even in the moonlight, the entrance walk was stunning. As they walked, the slow, steady wind blew silently through the grass, flowers, and trees on either side of them. When he reached the inner gate entrance, he stopped. Police tape and warnings covered the doors, but they remained open. There was no one in the guard shack. The shack's wood had a dark stain on it. Itachi's second kill of the evening, most likely. Shisui had been the first. When she approached him slowly, he spoke once more. It hasn't even been half a year since Itachi murdered the hundreds of people of my clan. The gate guard would have been a chunin, and a lower-level member of the police force. They wouldn't have stood a chance against Itachi, nor would they have expected him to attack. For the first time since he had first seen her, he turned to face her. Her eyes were red from tears and strained, but tonight she didn't have the typical expression of bloodlust. Thank God, neither was her dagger. I want to show you what the compound looks like, Sasuke continued. I want to show you more about the Uchiha clan that Itachi destroyed. But first. He had always regarded himself as an authority on the other sex. It was an innate talent, most likely the antithesis of Naruto's own. He was now aware that she wouldn't be able to contain her emotions and just stroll alongside him following the emotional roller coaster she had just experienced. For this walk to be successful, she had to let it out for a short while. That's what he might assume for a typical girl, anyway. She wasn't typical. When he first met girls, most of them tried to flirt with him rather than slit his neck with a crystal. Even though Gurren seemed alien to him, she was still a girl, right? I thought she was still human. It's time for another chance. Hell, he might as well do it since he had so far escaped death. Whispering, "Everything's going to be all right," he approached her and placed a hand on her shoulder. Despite gasping, she did not flinch. "I'm glad you chose to walk with me. We're going to get through this." He inhaled deeply before embracing her. In case these were his last moments, he closed his eyes and started to say a silent prayer. She was most likely going to murder him. Gurren Sasuke Uchiha approached her and gathered her in an embrace before she could speak to him. Her initial reaction was to take advantage of this opportunity to murder him. It was something she really wanted to do. She chose to curse him out instead. But against her will, she let out a very unflattering sob as soon as she opened her mouth. She was unable to recall the last time she had received a hug. Most likely from her mother many years ago. She had forgotten how comforting it was to be held and cared for by someone. She instinctively tried to bury her head in him to stifle the next sob she felt coming. It was more difficult to conceal her trembling as he gave her a tighter hug. Despite her best efforts, she was unable to contain it. The weeping continued. In an attempt to pry herself away with her uninjured arm, she ended up clinging to his back for dear life and drawing herself closer. She assumed that her body was simply no longer doing what she wanted it to. Perhaps she had betrayed her body, and it was trying to protect itself. The last time she had truly cried uncontrollably like this had been too long ago to recall. After the death of her parents, she had vowed to herself that she would never again cry in such a way and that she would grow strong enough to avoid doing so in the future. When she broke that promise, she didn't think Sasuke Uchiha would be there to support her. Her dream had been stolen by him. It was he who discredited the very reason she was alive. He had more of a desire than she did to destroy Itachi, and he had the strength to make that desire a reality. When she was able to speak again, she was able to mumble, "I wanted to you kill me," in his chest. She continued to shake for several minutes after that, but she persisted. "In the prelims. Why didn't you just kill me?" She wasn't expecting a significant response. After all, it was a dumb question. He didn't need a reason to kill her. Perhaps he simply didn't feel like it. After a minute, he didn't even answer her. She just kept crying until she could breathe normally again. Still lacking the confidence to meet his eyes, she repeated, "And why did you stop me earlier?" At the moment, she felt pathetic. Why would you care if I died or not? He released his arms behind her, sensing that she was at last no longer trembling. She let out a sigh and in some way wished he had held her for a little longer. She detested having those feelings. The only one clinging now was her. Then, in an attempt to regain her composure, she stepped back from him and let her arm drop as well. It was much colder without him. She didn't want to ask Sasuke to give her another hug, but she wanted him to. To her astonishment, he took her hand instead and guided her cautiously through the gate. "Sasuke, I am so grateful that he survived." Even though she appeared to be broken, it was solemn to hold her sobbing against his chest in that way, but he couldn't help but feel a little elated. By hugging someone like Gurren, he had put himself in danger of dying. She had wanted him dead, he knew. However, now he had taken her hand to persuade her to follow him as he had anticipated, leading her through the gate and walking with her. When he attempted to release his hand, he was surprised to find her holding on tightly. What on earth was going through her mind? Was he secure? At this point, they were walking hand in hand. To relax and gather his thoughts, he inhaled deeply. He heard her questions even though they were muffled into his chest, and she was entitled to an answer. How come he hadn't killed her? Why didn't he allow her to end her own life? He decided to begin by saying, "You and I are both Avengers." While gathering his thoughts, she was barely able to walk behind him without making eye contact, even though she was holding his hand. And beyond that, the same man set us on this path together. Itachi killed your family, and then he killed mine. When he reached the first identifiable landmark, he stopped. When he entered the gate and headed toward his house, he was always met by the flower shop of an elderly couple. Now the stand was shattered. The wooden door has more dark stains on it. One of the regions that was largely undamaged was this one. That was probably because the villagers of Uchiha were unaware that Itachi was there to murder them. Sasuke went on, "To you, Itachi was a murderer," and he pulled on her hand before continuing to move. "But to me, he was also a betrayer. I loved him as a brother, and I thought he loved me. I was on our first mission with my team that left the village. AC rank. Itachi ambushed us, killed my sensei who was Naruto's older brother. They had been best friends. He stunned us, and when I woke up I returned to the clan compound to find fire, blood and destruction everywhere." They reached a crossroads. On the corner, there was a restaurant and an inn that had been nearly destroyed, as though they had been hit by a huge explosion. Knowing the size of Itachi's massive fireball, Sasuke pictured Itachi standing here before demolishing the two buildings. Although Sasuke had never entered, he was aware that each had probably been visited by dozens of people, burned alive or crushed to death. "No one was alive when I returned," Sasuke said solemnly as he ushered her ahead again. He could close his eyes and walk this path as many times as he had. "I ran from the entrance along this way, passing the dead bodies of my clan and the burning houses around me, until I came to my home." Sasuke and Gurren soon found themselves in front of his former residence. The street and the house were completely illuminated by the moonlight, which gave Sasuke the awful sense of nostalgia he always experienced when he returned here. There was no damage to the house. He had the impression that he could shout, "I'm home," and open the door to find his mother standing there, about to chastise him for being out so late. Gurren continued to grip his hand. She squeezed him for support, her eyes wide open as she reenacted the story with him. He walked with her through the entrance, slowly guiding her forward and sliding the wooden door open. As he entered, he chose to leave his sandals at the door for no apparent reason. Gurren did the same. The house was as clean as it had been when his mother had last been inside, save for obvious dust. After the Anbu obtained sufficient proof to validate Itachi's involvement, Naruto and Sasuke had decided that no one else was permitted to enter the compound. The ghost town continued to be trapped in time. A ghostly representation of his mother grinned and said, "Welcome home, Sasuke," as he and Gurren approached. "Oh my, you've brought a friend home. A girl too. You should have told me and I would have made something special to eat. My little Sasuke is growing up to be a fine young man." As he guided Gurren ahead and turned his back on the phony picture of his mother grinning, the first tears finally escaped and fell silently down his cheeks. She wasn't real. No, he would never be able to bring a girlfriend home to show her off, and she would never again greet him. As they passed her, she jokingly asked him, "You're not going to take her straight to your room, are you? Sasuke, you scoundrel, you didn't even introduce her to us. As soon as your father finds out he'll..." Gurren must have seen him cry. Fortunately, she remained silent and simply tightened her hold on his hand. As he walked past him in the corridor, a picture of Itachi said, "What's up, Sasuke?" His brother's younger, gentler self. Not wanting to disturb Sasuke and his companion, he winked at him and carried on walking. "I had something I wanted to tell you, but maybe some other time." At last, he reached his parents' door. He slid it open with his unoccupied hand. Just as it had all those nights before, a beam of moonlight poured in through the window, eerily illuminating the plain room. Sasuke described, "No one answered my calls," as he and Gurren entered the room. "I had hoped that my mom and dad were still alive, but no one answered. I figured out why when I came here to open the door." The enormous dark stain on the wooden floor in the middle of the room caused Gurren's eyes to widen. "My parents were lying on the floor in a pool of their own blood," Sasuke added glumly. He wiped the tears from his eyes. Itachi was standing over them, and the pool was still slowly but steadily expanding. "I was actually relieved to see him at first, thinking, whoever the killer was, he didn't manage to get Itachi. I saw the blood streaming from his katana when he threw a kunai at me, and he called me a stupid little brother for going straight to the murderer. He cast a prohibited jutsu on me using his Sharingan. It's a higher level of genjutsu than any you've ever heard of. It is unavoidable and ensnares you in the caster's imagined world. He compelled me to witness him kill every single Uchiha. Both young and old. Those on their knees begging for mercy and those fighting back. I saw him drive the katana into my parents' hearts and burn people alive. I almost broke." He finished by saying the same icy words that he probably told you. To struggle, to get stronger, to flee, and to survive. He couldn't stay in his parents' bedroom much longer to gather his thoughts, so he dragged Gurren away and went down the hall into his room, ignoring the picture of his father, perhaps in a different life, leaning against the wall and shaking his head with a cunning smirk. Sasuke had chosen to leave everything that wasn't ninja-related in his home. He had used his newly acquired fortune to buy a new apartment, a new bed, new furniture, everything. His room still looked like he was living there, from the futon and tatami mat on the floor to the pictures that were still on his desk. He pulled her inside, shut the door behind him, and with a sigh, he walked over to the cushions that were still out on the floor and sat down on one. She still had a sad expression on her face, having just told him about the terrible experience, but he repeated, "You and I are Avengers," once he was confident enough that his voice wouldn't falter. "But that isn't all we are." Unbelievably, Naruto was able to assist me in learning that following the incident. After it happened, he and I spent some time together in a dark place, but ultimately, we still had each other. Even now, we still ate, laughed, and trained together. I believe I might have found myself in a similar situation to yours if it weren't for our friendship. I will kill Itachi, and I do want to kill Itachi. However, that doesn't mean I can't spend a night out at Naruto's favorite ramen bar with some friends. I can still get a girlfriend despite this. Life is about more than just seeking revenge. If you believe it, spending time with that blonde idiot will teach you that. He hadn't really discussed this experience with anyone but Naruto, so it felt good to finally open up and talk about everything with someone. Having someone who could understand his pain was refreshing, in a way, and he wanted Gurren to feel the same way. "I didn't kill you in the Chunin exams because that would be a waste of life," Sasuke said in response to her query. "No matter how much you despise me for resembling Itachi, you and I are too similar. In that fight, we put each other to the test, and I just so happened to win. What the heck? This clan has already seen enough blood spilled on it, so I stopped you when I saw you about to commit suicide. The only people left who still want to find Itachi and bring him to justice are you and me. Your dream does not vanish just because you were defeated by me in combat. "We can't both kill Itachi," she finally managed to say quietly, her voice a little rough, as if she were having trouble with something. "We can't both achieve that dream. You are more capable than I am, and you deserve it more than I do." He shook his head and interrupted her, saying, "That's stupid, but who said we couldn't both succeed? Who's to say we can't cooperate to defeat Itachi? Given Itachi's strength, don't we have a much better chance of preventing him from cooperating?" He had not given the prospect of working with her much thought until now, but why not? Her eyes widened as his new line of thought sliced through the fog of confusion, and he could almost see the hope rising in them. Sasuke went on to say, "You're strong, and I'm committed to getting even stronger. Together, I believe we could train one another to achieve greater things and realize our dreams more quickly." "Oh no, did you overlook Naruto? His motivation for wanting to kill Itachi is no less valid than ours. His clan was also the Uchiha. When we can cooperate, I don't think it makes sense for one person to have to kill Itachi." He couldn't help but smile as she continued to light up her eyes and leaned forward slightly on her mat. "I think you need what I needed after I was swallowed in darkness," he said. "Something you are unable to accomplish on your own. You require assistance. You require a companion." The morning after, not even a day had gone by when Sasuke woke up next to another girl, and considering how serious yesterday had been, he found himself laughing for the first time in what seemed like a long time after he and his ex-girlfriend Sakura had a fight yesterday that ended in their relationship being broken, if only temporarily. For better or worse, his laughter had roused Gurren in the sleeping bag on his bedroom floor, and they had been able to sit and chat for so long into the night that Sasuke finally pulled out his sleeping bag to make them more comfortable, and before he knew it, they were asleep. It was undeniable that he had already slept past his training hit time with Kakashi, but it had been worth it. Gurren needed someone to whom he could talk. "Where am I?" Gurren eventually mumbled to herself as she sat up and tried to shield her eyes from the sunlight. "Sasuke. Hold on, what took place?" The heat in the stuffy old room without fans made him take off his shirt at one point, and he knew he looked good shirtless, and hate him or not, he knew that Gurren knew he looked good shirtless. After all, he and she had both cried together last night, so he thought they deserved some jokes and laughter now, if anyone did. He gave her a cunning smile and moved to sit at the end of her mat, saying, "Don't act as though you don't remember. You were only a girl yesterday, but after last night, you are now formally a woman. Well done." Color rose to her cheeks as her eyes darted over his body, if only briefly, but he caught them. Oh, so it wasn't just Hinata who flushed now, was it? Was he really going to make a move on? Quicker than he could possibly avoid it, Gurren spun out for a sitting position and executed a full-fledged roundhouse kick. Perhaps he could, but it would take too much work. He simply closed his eyes and accepted his fate without protest. No progress here. She was a violent type. Some people had a thing for girls like that, but he wasn't one of them. He could flirt and get almost any girl he wanted, so there was no point in pursuing the violent ones who hit him, even in jest. After a long moment of contemplation, he realized that he had not been flung across the room, and when he opened his eyes slowly, he saw her foot hovering just inches from his face. She sighed and slowly dropped it, returning to her seated position, but this time she sat back on her calves, with her knees on the floor. Thank you for taking care of me," she finally said, bowing formally to the ground after taking a deep breath to regain her composure. His jaw dropped in wonder. Was she truly thanking him, or was she just coming back with a sexual joke of her own? "I don't have any friends," she finally said quietly, without looking up into his eyes, but she was being honest when she said that. "People my age don't like spending time with me because I'm usually pretty violent and harsh with my acquaintances. I've never given a damn about that, but you saved me last night, told me your story, listened to mine, and allowed me to stay in your room just as I was about to attack you in response to a simple joke. I want to change," she said, pausing to inhale deeply. "That's not how I want to be. You were correct last night when you said, I think I need help. I believe I need a companion. I had a terrible day yesterday, but after telling you my stories, I've never felt so liberated. I came to the realization that, unlike everyone else, I don't want you to despise me. Not after last night. I've never felt so exposed in my life." Even though she wasn't actively trying to kill him, she was actually kind of cute when she was being open and honest like this. Nevertheless, they had spent the night together telling serious stories, and he was emotionally spent and didn't want to resume their somber conversations. The crystal girl could counter all of his ninjutsu, but not an embrace and his good looks. It's funny how that worked. "Don't worry about it," he said, smiling as he stood up to get his shirt and put it on, catching her staring at him once more. "Come on, let's have breakfast or something. We still have a lot to discuss." "Breakfast? It was probably closer to lunchtime. Well, that's what you get for staying up late. I think some fresh air and sunlight could help us too. He went to the window and pulled open the blinds, letting a torrent of sunlight stream into the room. He shielded his eyes and looked out to discover that the sun was just about at the peak of the sky, nowhere near the horizon. Naruto, before running outside his apartment and vaulting over the railing to the streets below earlier that day, Naruto had crammed some hurriedly prepared breakfast into his mouth, dressed in his favorite black t-shirt with the Uchiha fan on the back, comfortable shorts, sandals, and, of course, his water balloon. He had gone straight to the hot springs to catch the pervy old man and demonstrate to him how fast he had mastered popping the balloon. Unfortunately, when Naruto demonstrated how to pop the water balloon, the Sannin appeared rather unimpressed and instead threw him a rubber ball of the same size while stating that he was spying on women. All right, try popping this now. Once you've discovered that, return. Now hurry up, kid, I'm working right now, hee. The crowd would cheer as Naruto used his chakra to pop a variety of toys during the upcoming finals, and perhaps Neji would stand in awe and surrender as he did so. Naruto had found himself walking over to his favorite ramen bar once again while throwing the bouncy rubber ball up and down to himself. Jiraiya was becoming less and less like a legendary ninja and more like an old, useless pervert. He wondered how many more items he would have to pop before the actual training began, if it ever did. When he thought about the finals, he actually experienced a slight wave of anxiety for the first time. Thousands of people watching him fight, coupled with the anxiety of someone attempting to kill you. Sheesh, he hoped he could remain composed during it all. Now that Jiraiya had given him a new training objective, he had the majority of the day to figure out how to pop the ball, visit Hinata-chan, and perhaps even learn from Madara how to begin the process of unlocking the Mangekyo. He sighed as he looked down at the rubber ball in his hand, wondering if he should just stop seeing the Sannin altogether and concentrate on Madara's instruction. Oi, old man, fire me up some pork ramen, and while you're at it, Naruto said, sticking his head under the curtains as he approached his favorite restaurant, grinning as the aroma of ramen filled his nostrils. When he noticed who was seated at the bar right in front of them, he abruptly stopped speaking. Sasuke. Even more startling was the fact that the blue-haired crystal girl who had previously attacked them at this exact restaurant was sitting next to his dark-haired friend. Why were they together? With an expression of frustration on his face, Sasuke turned around and said, "Damn it, Naruto, I figured there was a 50% chance we'd run into you if we stopped here." Nope, Sasuke and the crystal Akatsuki girl were sitting in front of them, both turning to stare at Naruto, who rubbed his eyes and wondered if he was seeing the wrong person. Sasuke looked visibly irritated, and the girl instantly ducked his gaze and spun back toward the bar. What in the world? Your orders are prepared. Ayame emerged from the kitchen carrying 2 bowls of some sort of ramen, and she skillfully leaned over the counter to place them in front of Sasuke and the girl with a steady hand. She waved and smiled slyly at Naruto when she looked up and saw him standing there. Salutations, Naruto-kun. You know, I thought that you would be the first of you Uchiha boys to bring a date here with you, but it looks like Sasuke has you beat, she exclaimed with joy, gesturing for him to sit down. There's no way in hell. And what happened with Sakura? He let his jaw drop as she winked at him playfully. This isn't a date. The girl shouted out a little more forcefully than was necessary in the shop. She seemed flushed with either anger or embarrassment. Probably anger. I would never go on a date. Sasuke sighed once more, and Naruto wondered if this was why he hadn't been so thrilled to see Naruto arrive. In any case, he approached the bar slowly and chose to sit next to the girl, curiously watching her as she snapped off her chopsticks and mouthed a silent "Itadakimasu" before biting into it. Was this a ruse? Sasuke was good with girls, but even he had his limits, or at least he believed he did. She finally turned to scowl at him, saying, "Pardon me, is there anything I can do to help?" She spat out angrily, firmly putting down her chopsticks. His friend merely rolled his eyes and moaned, while Naruto merely lifted an eyebrow and leaned slightly to the side to shift his gaze to Sasuke. Naruto, if you're just going to make a scene, then get the hell out of here. At last he spoke up, saying, "Me?" He pointed at himself with clear amusement on his face. "Make a scene. Recall how this girl appeared during our most recent meal here. It's you and the insane crystal girl who has attempted to kill you several times on a ramen date." Gurren swung her arm sideways and raised the chopsticks to Naruto's throat, causing him to swallow his final words. "It is. No a date." With a ferocious expression in her eyes, she dared him to challenge her, carefully pronouncing each word. "Geez," Naruto said, raising his hands in a gesture of self-denial. "You're right, it's not a date. All right. I'm not sure what I was thinking because Sasuke isn't into crazy, explosive girls anyway. Who is paying, then? You wish to pass away? Her face became even hotter as she slammed the chopsticks down and turned to face him. Well, it depends, he said, raising an eyebrow and turning back to Sasuke. Will Sasuke support you or me if we fight? Right now, I just finish my meal while she beats you up with just one good arm, and then I leave the bill in your name, laugh, and step on you on my way out, Sasuke said, turning to face him once more with irritation. So, do you want to clarify why you and her are so friendly now? What was the girl's name again? Really, she tried to kill you here the other day, Naruto said in defeat as he scooted a short distance away. What took place? A lot of things happened, Sasuke shrugged, as if it were the most commonplace thing in the world. However, you're making it difficult for Gurren and I to enjoy our date right now. It's not an oomph. Before she could finish exploding, Sasuke calmly said, yeah, learn how to take a joke, Gurren, and then returned to his own dish, skillfully jamming some of his noodles in her mouth to silence her. He would have to ask Sasuke later what in the world had happened for him to be eating ramen with Gurren, but he wisely decided that for the time being he should just ignore it. Naruto couldn't help but shake his head in amazement as Ayame returned with his order of ramen. Gurren's face heated up, but she surprisingly swallowed the food before returning to her own with a scoff. Afterwards, after his unsuccessful training with Jiraiya and his perplexing lunch with Sasuke and Gurren, Naruto had made the decision to visit Hinata. It must have been something serious, but they had never really explained to him why they had met. Naruto was certain Gurren had detested Sasuke. However, they were now having lunch together. It couldn't be expressed any other way. The lunch date was that day. On the other hand, Naruto knew very little about romance, while Sasuke knew a great deal. Hell, he was still unsure of Hinata-chan's feelings for him and if he should proceed with the next move. Did she like him, even though she had kissed his cheek? She seemed to like Sasuke now, even though Gurren had attempted to kill him. For him, girls were simply too confusing. Come in. When he got to the front, he knocked on the door and heard Hinata's muffled voice. He had thought about entering through the window, but since visiting hours were open, there was no real reason to do so and he might be caught. He was already grinning when he entered. Hey, Hinata, he said, shutting the door after him. You won't believe who I ran into at the... He turned his attention to the bed where she usually sat, but it was empty. She wasn't there when he swiftly looked around the small room. What on earth? Had he not heard her call him in? Was he now hearing sounds? Curious, he turned around to see if she was out somewhere and he had just... Boo! When he had finished turning around, Hinata's face was only inches from his own. His heart had almost skipped a beat when he screamed and collapsed back in shock. Hinata-chan was standing on the ceiling, her dark hair hanging straight down in front of the door, but she was now laughing hysterically. She landed on her feet, still laughing, after falling and flipping in midair. Got you? She exclaimed, gesturing down at him as he made an awkward attempt to stand up. The look on your face. Naruto picked himself up and made an effort to appear irate. Her laugh, unfortunately, was contagious. His smile was a defense. I thought you were supposed to be recovering in bed, he said. You're not supposed to be using chakra like that, and. He let out a sigh. He ought to have been more aware. Hinata understood him completely. He removed his sandals and jumped onto the bed, challenging, well, if you're not going to use the bed, then you can sit in those uncomfy chairs then. He stretched his feet and sat against the back. She will see that. Instead of telling him to leave or pulling up a chair in surrender, Hinata went to the bedside tray and took the book she had taken from Jiraiya a few days prior. Her pearly eyes glinted mischievously as she leapt up in perfect cannonball form, aiming straight for him. Bombs away! She exclaimed, grinning. Instead of being crushed beneath her, Naruto swiftly scooted to the side, allowing her to land next to him without incident. He had escaped unharmed, save for bouncing around for a few seconds. Why did she act that way today? She said, this is my bed, but ultimately scooted toward him. She placed the book in his lap after taking it out of the shelf. Have you already eaten, Naruto-kun? I thought that maybe we could read a little bit about the book your parents loved so much. They specifically told me to rest my eyes and avoid reading anything, so I thought maybe you could read it out loud. For added effect, she wore a pouty expression, which made Naruto sigh. Hey, I said I was going to read it with you anyways, you don't have to give me that look. You know what? I think staying crammed up in this room has given you too much energy or something. What's gotten into you? Hinata chuckled softly and gave him a shoulder rub. Nothing, I'm just really happy to see you again, Naruto-kun. Her cheeks began to slowly but surely flush as she gazed at him intently. When he remembered how she had kissed his cheek yesterday, Naruto couldn't help but feel a little hotter. He had previously asked her if he missed her former self-assurance from their days of playing practical jokes together in the orphanage, but it appeared that she was beginning to regain it and turn it against him. With haste, he turned to face the book he was holding. He said, "Well, anyway, let's see what this book is titled," as he read the first page of the book. Apart from the fact that he was named after the hero, Naruto had no idea what this book was actually about because it appeared that the book's outer cover had been taken off. As he read aloud, "Make Out Paradise," by Jiraiya the Toad Sage of Konoha, Hinata was looking at herself inquisitively. "That's a weird title, I think." Hinata didn't seem to mind. "Sounds interesting. I wonder what it's about. Go on, keep reading." With a shrug, Naruto turned the page. Nothing more than a credits and thank you page. A strange drawing of a man pursuing a woman caught his attention as he turned the page once more. To be honest, it appeared to have been drawn by a child. What did it matter anyway? After all, the story is what makes a book great, not the title or anything else. "You ready?" he asked, turning to the beginning of the first chapter. With a nod, Hinata leaned over his shoulder and closed her eyes to simply listen. He took a deep breath to calm his nerves, but his heart began to beat a little faster. All right. Chapter 1. Afterwards, Naruto finished the first chapter and closed the book with a very satisfying sigh. He had likely never experienced anything as embarrassing as that. Oddly enough, the protagonist, who wasn't called Naruto, was a silly ninja who never gave up. There was more to it, even though it might have sounded like him. The ninja were not at all aiming for anything noble or imposing in the first place. A flashback of a cute girl asking the protagonist out and him rejecting her because she didn't have any curves opened the chapter. Really? The protagonist, despite his youth, seemed to already know the kind of woman he wanted. Then, in the present, the protagonist devoted a large portion of the chapter to praising the giving assets of his female teammate, the attractive girl from earlier, who had grown considerably curvier in recent years. When he asked her out, he was turned down, understandably. The storyline was so juvenile and corny. But what if Naruto wasn't genuinely curious about what would happen next? Naruto was genuinely curious about what would happen in the next chapter because of the main character's self-expression and the clever and humorous dialogue. In fact, he had chuckled a couple of times when reading aloud. However, Hinata. His friend had a red flush on her face when he turned to face her. God damn it, she would never. With a smile on her face, she exclaimed, "That was great. I really want to read the next chapter and find out what happens next." Naruto couldn't help but look at her in a state of great surprise. Even though he was intrigued by the plot, he asked her, "Really? I didn't think you would like it. Especially because the main character, you know." He was unsure of the right way to phrase it. Despite being informed that he was named after the main character, he couldn't help but feel that the main character looked more like Jiraiya-sensei after reading the first chapter. To put it simply, he was perverted. Have you ever tried reading to your female best friend a sentence that describes the ideal set of breasts? To put it mildly, it was awful. Surprisingly, though, Hinata didn't appear to be afraid to continue. She leaned forward and exclaimed, "It was so funny." With a huge smile on her face. I can't believe he had the courage to confess to her so quickly. She stopped, glancing between him and her own restless hands for a moment. Is that how most guys are, Naruto-kun? Do you wait to confess to a girl depending on how large her? No, Naruto interrupted, observing her direction. Now he had to protect the very reputation of every other man that Jiraiya had staked his claim on. This is a comedy. It's supposed to be funny. No one actually thinks like that. Immediately, he imagined the sexy old toad sage spying on nude women in the spa while giggling to himself in a tree. Well, perhaps that is how some people think. Not all of them, though. After a brief moment of eye contact, she looked down at her hands and asked him quietly, "Well, what do you like most in a girl, Naruto-kun? For as long as I've known you, you've never really talked about this sort of thing. Or flirted with other girls." As Naruto attempted to carefully navigate his way out of this mess, his heart began to race. He said, "Of course I wouldn't flirt with other girls," as he considered a more sensible course of action. "I couldn't think of anything. I'm already friends with you, plus, girls don't really tend to like me. Especially when I hang out with Sasuke, since he's all any girl ever pays attention to." Excellent. The ball was now in her court instead of his. Her head turned suddenly, and she looked at him gravely. When she said, "Other girls are stupid," then, she was being decisive. "I think you're incredible, Naruto-kun. and I like you more than Sasuke." Her genuineness caused Naruto to smile. Given that they had been best friends for ages, it was clear that she preferred him. He realized that aside from him and Sasuke, Hinata-chan actually had no other friends. In other words, she had no female friends. He made the decision to say, "Hey Hinata," and scooted slightly to the side to get a better view of her. "Do you ever wish that you had made more female friends in the academy?" "No," she answered without hesitation. "You're right. They only ever used to talk about Sasuke and other stupid things. When they found out that I didn't like Sasuke as much as they did and that I liked you more, we didn't really have much to talk about. Those girls were all weird anyway. I don't think they actually liked each other. They just saw each other as competition all the time. But at the same time, there's some things that I never really got to talk with other girls about." He became somewhat intrigued by this. "You can talk with me about anything," he exclaimed, sure that he could share anything with her despite not being a girl. "Really?" After a brief moment of staring at him, she shook her head. I can't talk about these things with you, specifically." He shrugged his shoulders and rolled his eyes at her. After all, the first chapter had been so embarrassing to read that he felt as though they had become closer just by going through it together. "Fine. But I feel like after reading this book, we should be able to talk about anything with each other," he said. She scooted closer to him and patted the book, saying, "You're right. With motivation. Let's keep reading then. Maybe this book will end up helping us get even closer, Naruto-kun. There has to be a reason why your parents liked it so much." He then picked up the book and began reading it again, hoping that it wouldn't get any more twisted than the first chapter, for better or worse. That night Naruto had to pause for a few moments before he could even read some sentences out loud because the following chapters had been so twisted. Since it was getting close to dinner time and he didn't want the nurses to find him in bed with Hinata, he made the decision to finish the book before beginning the next chapter. They were merely reading, but even so, his mind was formally corrupted. Though he couldn't even count how many times he and Hinata burst out laughing at the main character's ridiculous antics, he didn't regret reading it. He said, "You know, I forgot to tell you earlier," as he looked at her and closed the book. He could see every detail of her attractive face without even turning on the lights because the sun was still quite high in the sky and there was enough natural light in the room. "I ran into Sasuke and the Crystal Akatsuki girl at Ichiraku's. I don't know what happened between them, but they totally seemed like they were on a date." Hinata tilted her head sideways. She said, "I thought he and Sakura were dating." Which he had considered as well. Did they break up? He shrugged and moved to the edge of the bed, ready to get out. "No idea," he said. Gurren claimed it wasn't a date, but that's definitely what it looked like. He went to the door, picked up his sandals, and carried them to the window. It was faster that way, but he didn't have to jump out to get out. She remained in bed and asked, "What makes you think it was a date?" He returned to the window with a shrug. "I don't know, but that's what you call it when a guy and a girl go out and spend time together like that, isn't it? It's not like they're friends or anything." She muttered, clearly audible to him, "Sounds nice, going on dates and all," and he looked up at her, perplexed. Her expression was a peculiar mix of shyness and prankster. She paired it with the pouty expression that she seemed to be perfecting against him. The pearly eyes of Hyuga somehow made a pouty appear much more powerful than usual. Did she want him to ask her out? Was she? He scratched the back of his head and sighed. There was no use in being cautious any longer. Ironically, he had discovered that asking a girl out and being turned down wasn't the end of the world after reading about the ridiculous lead character in Makeout Paradise for the majority of the afternoon. Given that the big-breasted girl he kept pursuing was a member of his ninja team, the protagonist was actually in a similar predicament to his own, and they remained friends even after she turned him down. He was confident that his friendship with Hinata would endure long enough for him to ask her out. He was aware of it. Besides, yesterday she had kissed his cheek. He sat on the ledge, put on his sandals, and said nonchalantly, "Hinata-chan, would you like to go on a lunch date with me as soon as you get out?" He hoped he came across as more assured than he truly was. Perhaps he ought to have made it seem more humorous, just in case she. Hinata actually laughed excitedly and jumped out of bed. "Yes," she exclaimed, clenching her fist. As she had done the other night, she sprinted to the window and stood before him. She cleared her throat. "Ahem. I meant to say, yes, Naruto-kun, I think a lunch date would be lovely." Even though her face was still red, he could see the joy and excitement that were concealed beneath her mask of calm. He couldn't resist grinning back. She had said yes, but he had taken a chance. It had never been a formal date, even though they had eaten at Ichiraku's a lot before. What was the difference, now that he considered it? Why was it a date instead of their usual mealtime? In the end, it made no difference. He was reminded of how she had kissed him on the cheek yesterday and then slammed the damn thing shut on his face as soon as he opened the window. He had dropped all the way to the undergrowth. This time, he wouldn't let her get away with it. "Sounds great, Hinata-chan," he said with a smile as he observed her approaching him gradually but steadily. "Not now. You just have to get better and get out of the hospital then. Anyway, I'll see you around." He leaned forward and kissed her forehead before she could get close and do whatever she had planned. Unfortunately, he ended up kissing her nose because she had stepped forward herself. He realized how close they had just been to sharing a kiss as he froze in front of her face. As her face began to heat up once more, he spun around and jumped out the window with a laugh before she could blow up. "See ya later. Grounds for training." Pop. The rubber ball popped in Naruto's right palm, causing him to flinch but otherwise sit in silent surprise. The fact that he got it on his first try surprised him much more than the fact that the ball had popped. With the exception of a few far-off birds, Naruto felt alone in the world as the sun was now sinking in the western sky and the breeze was cool and light. Right now, he was seated with his back against one of the 3 wooden logs in Team 7's training area. He had anticipated spending the remainder of his day on this. He thought it might take him even longer to pop the rubber water balloon after he had some difficulty using just his chakra to pop the first one. Fortunately, that was not true. The rubber ball had popped on his first try. All he needed to do was add more chakra to the equation. It was much simpler because he could see the chakra flowing through his arm and into his palm when his Sharingan was in use. He could see the basic flow and direction of chakra, which was all he needed for this challenge, even though he couldn't see individual veins as precisely as the Byakugan could. Did Lord Jiraiya think he would need more time? Was it really worth returning the following day to update his status? Most likely, the pervert old man would just assign him another pointless training exercise that had little to do with anything. My offer still stands. If you have the courage inside of you, I am willing to show you what it takes to unlock the secrets of the Mangekyo Sharingan. Naruto felt the familiar presence of Madara Uchiha ascend into his mind through the spiritual chakra whirling inside of him as his Sharingan was activated. Despite his initial reluctance, he felt that Madara would probably be a better candidate to train him for the Chunin exams after he looked down at what was left of his rubber ball. Since he was by himself in the grounds, Naruto asked out loud, "Didn't you say before that unlocking the Mangekyo requires something extreme?" Without fear of being heard. "When I first asked you, you said I could unlock those eyes if I was willing to kill my friends. Well, nothing has changed since then. I'm not going to murder anyone." In his mind, the voice sounded like it was laughing. There are numerous ways to unlock the Mangekyo Sharingan. All of them are extreme. And yes, I accept that you are not willing to kill your friends, but I still wish for you to gain the power nonetheless. I'm worried about what Orochimaru has planned for the Chunin exams. No doubt he wishes to attack the village, and he may decide to try and kill you to eliminate me as a threat. He might even try and kill us before he attacks the village preemptively. I've waited patiently inside of you for these last dozen years or so, and I'm not about to die so easily if I can avoid it. You need the Mangekyo if you want to protect me, this village and yourself. In his thoughts, Naruto kept debating whether Madara Uchiha was truly the amazing villain that everyone had painted him as. He was aware of the man's evil. After all, Madara had attacked Konoha and his mother and father had died for him. However, Naruto couldn't shake the feeling that Madara was speaking the truth in this instance. He didn't really think of anything more intelligent to say, so he snapped back, "What do you care about the village? You tried to destroy it too. How'd I know you're not planning on helping Orochimaru out?" He was laughed at by the voice. "I only included the last part about helping the village and your friends to help convince you, foolish boy. I care most about my own safety right now. If you die, I die. Orochimaru plans on destroying this pitiful village, and while I couldn't be happier to see it burn to the ground, the Sannin knows that you wish to protect it. The smart thing to do would be to kill you just in case you try to use my power to interfere with him. That's what I would do in his place." That sounded logical. He had no idea of any methods to defend himself against someone of that caliber, and Orochimaru might try to kill him at any moment. He was certain that the snake Sannin would not be impressed by him using his chakra to pop balloons. "Why don't you walk to the Uchiha compound and let me explain to you a little bit more about the Mangekyo on the way? Just like the Sharingan, the Mangekyo is another tool in your arsenal that you can use for whatever you wish." Naruto pondered for a moment before shrugging and throwing the rubber remnants into his pocket. The training of Jiraiya could wait a bit longer. This appeared to be significant. Keeping his Sharingan active so he could still speak to Madara, he got up, brushed off his trousers, then pushed chakra into his legs and started toward the Uchiha compound. When he got to the tree line and began jumping off the branches, he asked, "So why do I need to go to the Uchiha compound?" "Quiet boy, and let me explain. This will faster without interruptions, but you'll probably interrupt anyway. Remember before how I told you that the Sharingan itself is a separate entity, a spiritual anomaly that operates apart from the will of the user?" As he avoided some branches, Naruto moaned, "Kind of?" In his mind, he heard Madara sigh. "Well, then pay attention this time. I'll start from the beginning. The Sharingan is a tool that we Uchiha use, but it sharpens itself based on the threat of the world around it. It is standard to unlock the Sharingan with only 1 or 2 tomo in each eye. This only happens when you find yourself in a situation, usually a fight, where your opponent is too fast for you and you can't keep up. Your Sharingan activates and helps you track movements better. Eventually, by the last stage of the normal Sharingan, it has developed enough that it can track the movements of almost any enemy, predict future attacks, predict hand seals, and cast genjutsu with ease. It is not necessary to unlock further beyond this stage. The next tier, the Mangekyo Sharingan, requires exerting more stress on the Sharingan than is possible in a typical battle in order to protect the user. To put it simply, there are pure and evil ways to accomplish this. Although the evil ways are by far the fastest, they may also be the most difficult. If you experience such intense mental suffering that you would probably die otherwise, the Sharingan will transform into the Mangekyo. After unlocking the Mangekyo, you will experience a permanent shift in your mental state and adopt a more relaxed perspective on life. That is the cost of gaining such destructive power. Given how quickly he was moving through the trees, Naruto was almost at the compound. "Well, that doesn't sound like something I would want," he said. "Which methods don't entail murdering my friends?" "As far as I'm aware, there are just 2. The only 2 methods that don't require a lot of emotional pain are death and murder, but there may be other ways to unlock the Mangekyo." The sun had just begun to peek over the horizon when Naruto landed in front of the gates to the Uchiha compound. Naruto hadn't been going there as much as Sasuke lately, and he still couldn't help but shiver as he entered the compound. It was just so wrong to see the compound so empty as it was now, empty, destroyed, and covered in bloodstains. He followed Madara's instructions and ended up walking up to the Uchiha clan's meeting place at the tip of the compound, where Fugaku-sama, Sasuke's late father and the clan leader, held all of the important clan meetings. Naruto had a feeling that something related to the Mangekyo would be present, but he had only visited this meeting hall once or twice before and had never seen anything of that kind. "Look at that tatami mat over there, do you?" Proceed to raise it. Below it is the entrance to the secret meeting spot. A secret meeting place? Naruto had never heard of such a place, but then again, he was barely a genin by the time the clan had been killed. He went to the mat Madara had shown him in his mind and lifted it off and to the side, probably not noticing anything strange if he hadn't been looking for it, but he saw an indent in the floor below, and pushing it revealed a handle that he could pull, and with a burst of effort, he was able to lift a fairly heavy trapdoor off the ground. He dusted off his hands and shook his head in mild awe as he saw the stairs that led beneath the ground. Well, down we go. Sasuke elsewhere. By the time the sun had finally started to set, Sasuke and his new blue-haired friend were walking toward his actual apartment. They weren't in the bustling streets of downtown Konoha anymore, but he was still holding her hand and making sure she felt his care and support if she needed it. Less than a day ago, he had discovered her with a crystal dagger out, ready to commit suicide. For better or worse, he had chosen to stop her, spend the night with her, and then show her around Konoha for the rest of the day. They had visited the Hokage monuments, several of the well-known clan compounds, the Hokage's tower, and had just returned from one of the downtown eateries that the Leaf Village was known for. Sasuke's apartment was on the top floor of a medium-sized building complex, just like Naruto's, which was a few short blocks away. Instead of jumping up the side of it as he usually did, he took the time to walk up the stairs with Gurren, who had begun to open up during the day but had been unusually quiet as he approached his room. "Here we are," Sasuke sighed, finally releasing her hand as they arrived at his door. Rather than opening it, he leaned against the railings at the edge of the hallway and turned to face her. "I would like to invite you in for tea, but first I think we should make it clear if you are going to live with me going forward as a married couple," he said. "Since I'm not sure if I'm prepared for that." He had intended it to be a light-hearted remark to start the conversation, but it failed to make her even smile. Instead, she looked up at him with obvious sadness, the joy she had felt at their dinner together gone. "Why have you treated me so well?" she finally blurted out, something that had obviously been bothering her all day. "I don't get it." She emphasized everything they had done together over the previous 24 hours by waving her arms, saying, "I don't deserve any of this." How could he possibly explain his motivations when he didn't really know why himself? "I've already told you why ending your life now isn't a good idea," he slowly began, maintaining eye contact with her. "I just wanted to make sure that you're—" He paused for a moment, trying to think of a suitable word, saying, "stable," but it didn't seem like the right one. "I just wanted to make sure that you're okay." She didn't appear content. "But why? Why do you care if I'm okay?" she inquired, her voice tinged with pleading desperation. "In what way does that help you?" Normally, he got along well with any girl he wanted to. He had never had any issues before. A smile and a few smooth words, along with his good looks, were all it took to guide a girl through any conversation he wanted. Gurren seemed immune, for better or worse. Nothing he said seemed to reach her, and she was probably more antisocial than Naruto was around people. Sasuke resisted the urge to run a hand through his hair and express the growing frustration he had been feeling around Gurren. He finally decided to say, "Because you're my friend," and he continued before she could interrupt, apparently observing the look of surprise and skepticism in her eyes. "After last night, of course you're my friend," he said. "And friends act in this way. Even if it doesn't directly benefit me, they support one another when they're in need." She obviously had no other friends, and he could understand why, considering her tendency to use cold violence to resolve all of her problems, but he didn't hate violent and annoying girls, but there was something refreshing about her that made him want to be friends with her. She was the first non-senju girl he had met who didn't fall in love with him by the end of their first conversation, and he found himself genuinely wanting to win her approval for whatever reason. And, like Naruto, they shared an unspoken bond because of what Itachi had done to both of their families, and their fates were intertwined if only because of that. "So, will you be staying with me this evening?" Crossing his arms, he asked again, wondering if he even had an extra futon in his room. After some quiet reflection, she shook her head and said, "No, I have to return to our own place tonight or Lord Kimimaro will likely become alarmed and begin searching for me. After all, he's my immediate boss." She sounded remorseful, as though she had truly wished to stay. The sun had already set, and Sasuke had to prepare to go to sleep as soon as possible in order to be able to get up in time for Kakashi's morning training sessions, so he shrugged and walked over to his door while he dug into his pocket to retrieve his keys. He opened the door and stepped inside, saying, "Have a good night then," but before he could take another step, he felt a tug on his shoulder. "Hold on." He had to remind himself that she probably didn't really know any better, but when he turned around, she was still clinging to him, clutching his shoulder more tightly than he needed to. She finally managed to say, "Thank you," but not while meeting his eyes. "Thank you for everything. I was saved by you. You saved me, you looked after me, you spent time with me today, and you claimed that we are friends in spite of everything." She glanced up once more, as if to make sure they were friends, and he nodded firmly, resisting the urge to swat her grabbing hand away. She gave him a fleeting smile before averting her gaze once more, but she continued to hold onto his shoulder. She obviously had more to say. "I'm going to be staying here for the next month or so." She paused, obviously uncomfortable even though she was the one grabbing him. Do you think that maybe we could meet up again?" she asked after taking a deep breath and looking up at him once more. "To practice, or what?" He nodded once more and couldn't help but smile at her nervousness. Crystal was evidently a softie on the inside, despite her hard exterior. In one way or another, almost everyone was like that. "I'm going to meet up with my sensei to train every morning at 0530, he replied. "We usually meet up at Training Grounds 13, but if you don't know where that is, you can stop by here before then and we can head over together." He wondered what Kakashi would think if he showed up one morning with a new training partner, but she finally let go of his shoulder and actually managed to smile back at him, and with a firm nod of her own, she waved goodbye and leapt over the railing, heading back to wherever her team was staying. Unsurprisingly, Naruto ended up in a long, dark hallway at the bottom of the small staircase that led down beneath the Uchiha's meeting hall, but with his Sharingan activated, he could see chakra signatures everywhere. What the hell? Avoid going any farther. The purpose of those antiquated seals is to prevent anyone from entering the inner sanctum. They would only be visible to a Uchiha who had an active Sharingan. As he felt a drop of perspiration trickle down his cheek, Naruto couldn't help but whistle. By stop, do you mean to stop them from walking further or to kill them? What were the Uchiha hiding down here that was so important? Did Sasuke know about any of this? Madara didn't respond, but Naruto could guess which one it was. Look over your shoulder. Is the seal on the wall sealed? Press chakra into it while placing your hand on it. Kindly take care not to advance before doing so. Naruto gulped in anticipation and extended his hand to the wall next to him, which was only dimly lit by the candlelight from the room above. He pushed chakra into the cold stone as soon as his palm touched it, and the seal instantly came to life and flared a bright red. Whoosh! Naruto snapped his head forward, seeing countless other seals light up and illuminate the hall in front of him, while at the same time, countless other seals on the ground and walls gradually but surely vanished completely. Now the seal on your left. Naruto walked over and pushed his chakra into a seal that had remained on the opposite side of the hallway, doing the same thing on the left. Before the trap door above him slammed shut, he heard a series of metallic clinking sounds reverberating through the stone, and the hallway was only illuminated by the strange fire-like glow of seals surrounding him, without any of the candlelight from above. This was really cool stuff. Naruto took a slow step forward, and since he didn't die right away, he felt more confident and started to move forward through the enigmatic old hallway. After a minute or so, he was able to see the entrance to a room at the end of the hall, now that his eyes had gotten used to the glow. Welcome to the Inner Sanctum, the secret meeting place of the Uchiha clan and location of Ancient Tablet. As promised by Madara, the room surrounding him was not very different from the meeting hall above. There were many dusty tatami mats scattered across the floor, and the room itself appeared to be big enough to accommodate the majority of the Uchiha clan's ninja. Naruto proceeded down the central aisle, heading for the back of the room, where something conspicuously stood out. A huge stone that appeared to be protruding from the back wall and appeared to be radiating chakra and seals. This had to be the ancient tablet Madara was referring to. When Naruto got close enough, he could see words on the top of the stone tablet, the secret of the Sharingan. He was so excited that he quickly skimmed the carefully written words below it, which gave him a brief overview of most of the things Madara had been discussing with him on the way over here. That the Sharingan was a separate entity from the user, fed by spiritual chakra, able to track movements, copy jutsu, and red chakra. He already knew most of this, but about halfway down the tablet, the word, Mangekyo, was mentioned for the first time. The Mangekyo Sharingan, an even higher state that allows one to transcend the boundaries of spiritual chakra and control reality itself, can only be unlocked by those who are prepared to endure the most intense trials of suffering and loss. The ancient god's blinding powers will be attained through various trials and pathways. That was it. It seemed to pause in the middle, and it didn't explain exactly how to release the power. This tablet will appear blank except for the title to those who do not have the Sharingan. The Sharingan can be read roughly halfway through until it talks about the possibility of unlocking the Mangekyo for those who have activated it to its third tomo. The tablet is intentionally confusing. Long before I was born, the authors wrote it with the intention of preventing a foreign clan from easily learning how to unlock the Mangekyo, even if they were able to steal a Sharingan. So the rest of the tablet can be seen after you unlock the Mangekyo? Naruto asked, rubbing his eyes, which had gradually become tired from staring up at the dimly lit tablet. What is it saying? What was meant by blinding power? Like with the Sharingan, you will be able to read about the various powers of the gods that you can now wield after unlocking the Mangekyo, he thought, hearing Madara laugh softly. It only gets you roughly 3 or 4/5 of the way through the tablet, though. It then explains how you can preserve your sight and power indefinitely. You see, even though the Mangekyo Sharingan has a lot of power, it is fleeting. The user will eventually become blind from using the tablet unless they can decipher the next puzzle. When the time comes, I'll let you read that for yourself. If it weren't for Madara's assistance, Naruto didn't think he would be able to figure out what it took to unlock the Mangekyo, so he reread the parts of the tablet that he could and found himself scratching the back of his head in confusion. So, will you tell me at last, or what? I'm not going to kill any of my friends, so how else can I struggle through the greatest trials of pain and loss? He inquired impatiently. No pure methods that you used appear to be mentioned on the tablet. For a few moments, the room was silent as Madara awaited her answer. In the past, the clan passed down the actual methods for unlocking the Mangekyo orally. Eventually, very few people were aware of it. Clan leaders and former elders agreed that only the highest-ranking clan members would be privy to it. Think about what I've already told you. Killing your best friend is one way to obtain the Mangekyo Sharingan. By learning this too soon, the Uchiha did not want all of its younger members to fear death from one another. They also didn't want the naive Uchiha to try to seize power by killing people who were close to them. The secrets of unlocking the Mangekyo were eventually kept secret from a select few because the clan would kill itself if that happened, which it almost did in the past. As the clan leader, I am aware of every method my clan members have used to unlock the Mangekyo. The 2 righteous ways I know are thus. First, to copy over 2,000 jutsu with your eyes, and second, to keep the Sharingan active for 3 days straight. The realization caused Naruto's eyes to widen. By the end of the month, he could not possibly analyze and replicate more than 2,000 jutsu. He himself barely knew more than 30 ninja techniques, which left only the alternative. Naruto asked out loud, "So you want me to just leave my Sharingan active for 3 days straight?" As he tried to recall the longest period of time he had ever done so. "That doesn't seem that hard. I'll just take a bunch of chakra pills with me and I'll be fine." But how does that count as suffering some sort of pain? Or does that not matter for the pure ways? Chakra pills won't work. Almost all chakra pills are physical chakra anyways, and even some that are designed to have some sort of spiritual chakra won't work for this test of endurance. It has to be your own chakra, which makes it incredibly difficult. Itachi learned of this and tried to activate the Mangekyo in this manner in order to possibly avoid killing his best friend. Obviously, he failed. The thought of Shisui made Naruto's stomach turn, as it always does. Imagine standing where he was. He pictured Itachi questioning whether he had what it took to unlock the Mangekyo. But how could he do it if Itachi couldn't? The best way to attempt this technique is to conserve all of your own chakra and sit still for 3 days straight, keeping your Sharingan activated. Even the most skilled Uchiha have trouble making it past the first day like this. As for your earlier question about pain and loss, those who have made it to the second day claim that eventually you will find yourself experiencing terrifying hallucinations. Most people will hallucinate if they are lacking in sleep, but something about the Sharingan makes the process faster and more extreme. I've only known a single instance of a person making it a full 3 days, which is why we know that this is even possible. Those with the spiritual chakra capacity find themselves unable to surpass the hallucinations. It will be great mental pain and stress indeed. Naruto swallowed in anticipation and fear. He didn't care to conceal his skepticism and asked, "What makes you think that I can even do it then? How could he have succeeded if others like Itachi had failed? You have an incredible advantage that others do not. As I'm sure you are aware, after using the Sharingan repeatedly, your spiritual chakra reserves will naturally increase. After unlocking and using the Mangekyo Sharingan, they will continue to do so. From the day you were born, the seal that the 4th Hokage placed on you has been slowly absorbing both my spiritual chakra and the Nine Tails physical chakra. Because of that, your chakra reserves are immense. And because I've already unlocked the highest level Mangekyo and have been training it for years, you have been absorbing incredibly powerful spiritual chakra. And finally, you were given the eyes of Shisui Uchiha, who had already unlocked the Mangekyo himself before his death. It will not be easy, but I believe that in your current state you will be able to last." Yes, exactly. For better or worse, Naruto usually forgot that he was constantly absorbing Madara's power. That made him wonder if his eyes were already stronger than Itachi's had been. He was prepared to try, anyway. He would go to any lengths if he could acquire this power without endangering his friends. No matter how much pain it took, he would bear it. There was nothing he would not do. He got to his feet confidently and decisively. "Alright, Madara-sama, I'll do it. I'll unlock the Mangekyo and use it to protect my village, my friends, and the legacy of my parents." In his mind, the voice laughed once more. "Yes, haha, perhaps you will. Or perhaps you've been blinded all this time, and you will finally open a new set of eyes and see the corruption around you that I have been trying to show. Perhaps you will finally see that this is not a village worth protecting. Perhaps." Early in the morning, Naruto was sitting in the middle of a remote forest clearing, miles away from the Hidden Leaf village, with the sun just starting to peek over the far horizon. At the moment, he wore a loose pair of shorts and a light jacket over his typical Uchiha clan shirt. He didn't have any of his regular training equipment with him. His kunai, sealing scrolls, and other necessities that he always carried on missions were left behind. All he had on his lap instead was a little brown pouch that contained a number of food pills. Madara had told Naruto to get up early the following morning with just the food pills on him after he had returned home from the covert meeting spot at the Uchiha compound last night. Naruto had remembered asking his old prisoner, "Not even some kunai? What if I'm ambushed or something?" The voice had merely responded with a dark chuckle. "You won't want to have any weapons around you during this trial. Trust me." Early this morning, Naruto had departed before the sun had even risen, determined to unlock the Mangekyo Sharingan no matter what. When he went back to his apartment again, it would be with a much larger pair of eyes than he had now. A pair of eyes he could use to keep the village and his friends safe. Naruto had been away from the village for about an hour when the forest clearing was selected at random. It was far enough in the remote forest that no one would bother him, but it was close enough to the hidden leaf that there would be no chance of enemy ninja being there. Naruto was by himself, for better or worse. Most every sane Uchiha, who seriously considers unlocking the Mangekyo Sharingan, has tried this method first. After all, most anyone would desire to try any option possible before resorting to killing those closest to them. And like I stated before, almost all Uchiha who have tried to keep the Sharingan active for 3 days straight have failed. Myself included. As Naruto traveled to this far-off place, he actually heard Madara share this with him, and his eyes widened in surprise. Had Madara attempted this previously and failed? He asked, trembling at the thought of finishing a task that even the renowned Madara Uchiha could not. How far did you make it? The first time I lasted about 24 hours. As the future clan leader, I knew that failure was not an option for me, and that no matter what I would have to unlock the Mangekyo. My father had given me a deadline to unlock the Mangekyo in preparation for an upcoming battle with the surrounding clans. I knew that if I couldn't keep the Sharingan active for 3 days I would have to kill my best friend. I tried multiple times and failed. The furthest I got was the week before the battle would take place. I made it 2.5 days. I succumbed to the hallucinations. My will wasn't strong enough at the time. This was something Naruto found difficult to accept. You had a strong enough will to kill your closest friend, but you still couldn't resist the hallucinations. What in the world are the visions like then? The warlord laughed again, darkly. Words cannot do it justice. Shortly enough, you will find out yourself. Perhaps at last his nerves got the better of him. Naruto pressed, is that why we are doing it out in the middle of nowhere? And why you told me not to bring weapons or food? There have been Uchiha in the past who have unintentionally killed themselves during this trial with their own weapons. It is safest to do it unarmed. As for food, like I have said before, you will want to stay still to conserve as much energy and chakra as possible. However, there is another benefit. If you remain still, you will have an easier time dealing with the hallucinations. Imagine if you were walking through the village and suddenly believed that you were being attacked by ninja, and you started killing everyone around you, when in reality you're actually killing innocent citizens who see you as a raging madman. Or perhaps more simply, you could see yourself walking down a familiar hallway, but in truth you are actually about to walk off a cliff. Naruto sat on the forest floor, swallowing his fear. He let the serene silence of the surrounding landscape give him a serene sense of direction. He was safe as long as he remained motionless. He would keep going as long as he kept his village and his friends in mind. He stood up excitedly and thought out loud, what if I draw a circle around myself? That way, I'll know that as long as I stay in the circle, I'm safe. Everything else is an illusion. That is something many have tried. So you draw a circle and convince yourself that you're safe. That just makes it far easier for you to give up in surprise when something steps inside that circle to kill you. Let me make this clear, Naruto. These won't be regular distant visions or hallucinations. This will be your Sharingan straining like it has never before. You will feel pain, and you will feel fear. And like many who have tried this method before, after you succumb to that pain and fear, you would rather kill your best friend than try again. There was no use in putting this off any longer. He took a seat on the grass and inhaled deeply. I'm ready. Naruto pressed chakra into Madara's eyes and turned on the Sharingan without waiting for a reply. He had a fresh perspective on the world, as if each time he used his new bloodline limit. To relax, he inhaled deeply once more. He had to concentrate on lowering his heart rate and maintaining his positive attitude even though he knew that nothing noteworthy would occur for the first several hours. Naruto became impatient after the first hour had gone by. He detested being motionless. Whether he was training or studying, he was always being active and involved in something interesting. Shikamaru would be an expert at sitting here doing nothing, but even though he had only been here for an hour, he was already miserable. Perhaps this would be a good opportunity to teach you about bloodline limits and the importance of stillness. As I'm sure you've read in the past, the Uchiha clan and the Senju clan were about equal in power for as long as they existed. Now that you know about the existence of the Mangekyo Sharingan, how do you think any clan was able to stand up to our might? How was stillness related to this? Naruto pondered for a while before discovering an intriguing possibility. Without fear of being overheard in the forest, he asked out loud, do the Senju also have their own version of the Mangekyo? I know it obviously wouldn't be a Sharingan, but like a similar upgrade to their ability to combine elements or something. A feeling of pride and approval came to Naruto's mind from Madara as their bond was reinforced by his active Sharingan. Good, very astute. You were correct. The Senju also have an incredible upgrade to their powers that is perhaps equivalent to the Sharingan's upgrade to the Mangekyo. Just like with us, there were few in their clan who could actually activate the power and even fewer who could master it. Hashirama, the first Hokage, was one such master. Naruto couldn't suppress his curiosity. Thinking of his own Senju friend, he asked earnestly, "What's the power called? Can Hinata-chan unlock it herself? Is it just as hard to unlock as the Mangekyo?" Their power is slightly different than ours, in that every single Uchiha has the potential to unlock the Mangekyo, but very few have the willpower to do so. For the Senju, only a few had the innate ability to unlock their upgrade, but of the small group that did, each one of them could fairly easily learn to do it. Their power is called Sage Mode. Sage Mode. In fact, he thought he had heard of that before. Sage Mode is their unique ability to take chakra from the surrounding nature and infuse it into their bodies. This chakra is as powerful an enhancement to their physical chakra as the Mangekyo is to our spiritual chakra. Their speed, strength, and elemental jutsu prowess is increased to inhuman capabilities. As you know, the ultimate physical chakra of the Senju clan allows them to combine elemental chakra as well as formulate complex jutsu with only a single hand seal. Sage Mode eliminates the need for hand seals entirely. Infused with the very energy of nature, they can punch through mountains, move as fast as the wind, and unleash their elemental chakra without even the need for a hand seal. Only a Mangekyo-wielding Uchiha can possibly stand up to a Senju in Sage Mode. They can move faster than we can keep up with, use jutsu that we can't copy, and combine elements against us. It was impossible for Naruto not to feel overwhelmed. How could the Uchiha fight the Senju evenly if they possessed such a powerful ability? To what extent did the Mangekyo Sharingan possess power? Did Hinata possess this talent? I obviously don't know more than the basics of the Senju bloodline from fighting and studying against them, just as they don't know the secrets of the Mangekyo. Both are clan secrets. However, I must add on one thing for clarification. Before I said that only a few Senju are born with the innate ability to use Sage Mode. While that is true, technically anyone, even if they aren't Senju, can learn to use Sage Mode. That is where the importance of stillness comes in. First of all, the only way most people would ever be able to learn how to use Sage Mode is through a contract with a summon. Many summons live in holy places where one can better learn to draw in chakra from nature. Even then, there is the risk that you will die or turn to stone if you cannot do it properly. Perhaps more so, in order to activate this mode, you would need to stay completely still, sometimes as long as minutes, which cannot be done in battle. Senju born with this innate ability can draw in Sage Chakra in an instant. After Hinata was pushed against the wall in the preliminary fight, she managed to stay motionless long enough to draw in a semblance of power, which allowed her to combine elements without hand seals and temporarily overpower her opponent. As for Hinata, I was able to observe that she clearly possesses this innate ability to draw in chakra from nature, which she very clearly demonstrated in both her fight against Orochimaru and later in the preliminary fight against the other Hyuga. She has the potential to master this ability in the future, which will eventually transform into Sage Mode. An overwhelming sense of pride in his best friend washed over Naruto. She most likely didn't realize how strong she could get. Wanting to know more about his own potential power, he made the decision to ask, "And the Mangekyo? How does the Mangekyo stand up to that power? If the Senju gets the power of the earth from nature through Sage Mode, then we get the power of the heavens from the Mangekyo Sharingan. According to our oldest legends, either the sage or our founding leaders had to go through trials when humans had a closer relationship with the ancient gods, so each power has been named after a particular trial of a god thought to have given it. I'm not sure how much of that is true, but after seeing the power of the Mangekyo, which can even defeat the might of the tailed beasts, I believe there might be some truth to it. While every Uchiha has the potential to unlock the Mangekyo, not every Uchiha has the ability to master all of the Mangekyo's techniques. When a Uchiha first unlocks the new ability, they are granted one or two special powers. The powers unlocked are correlated with the method used to unlock the Mangekyo, though it is not absolute. For example, like I told you last night, there are generally evil and righteous ways to unlock the Mangekyo. Evil ways generally involve sacrificing someone else, while righteous ways generally involve sacrificing yourself. The evil ways, which involve evoking a suicidal amount of pain usually through killing those you love most, unlock a certain set of powers. Some say that this is the original sacrifice the old gods demanded. Most who kill those closest to them will either unlock Amaterasu, the sun god's power, or Tsukuyomi, the moon god's. In certain cases, usually when the person they sacrifice is their spouse or child, they unlock the powers of Raijin, the demon god of thunder, or Fujin, the demon god of wind. Before he fell too far behind, Naruto made the decision to interrupt. He didn't know what a godly power was, so he asked, "When you say power of the gods, what does that actually mean? What is the power of a moon god?" Despite Madara's obvious annoyance at being interrupted, the elderly patriarch of Uchiha responded to him. "All right, I'll go over them in detail as I go along. As I mentioned earlier, more, evil, ways of unlocking the eyes usually give you destructive power right away. Using a, evil, method to unlock the Sharingan will also make it easier to unlock other, evil, methods. Tsukuyomi, the moon god, enables you to trap your victim in an inescapable genjutsu where you control their reality, and if you kill them in their genjutsu, they will die in real life as long as they don't have the Sharingan. Raijin, the thunder demon god, gives you the ability to control the most intense pain imaginable, which apparently electrocutes every nerve in an inexplicable way for as long and as intensely as you want. You can easily put in enough chakra to make someone die from their heart exploding, or to leave them mentally unstable or comatose. Fujin, the wind demon god, gives you the ability to send forth a blade of wind that can slice through anything. The more chakra you put into it, the larger the pulse is, and the faster it is. It can be vertical, horizontal, or anything in between as long as you visualize it correctly. It will stop at your command or based on the target you choose. While the other Mangekyu techniques obviously require your eyesight in a specific way, Amaterasu and Fujin require you to simply pick out a point for the attack to be directed, while Tsukuyomi and Raijin require direct eye contact to work. All of the powers I've described so far can be easier to unlock if you gain the Mangekyu in an evil way. All those methods sounded like nightmares. He could see how they might be helpful, but he couldn't fathom killing someone in a dream world or using Raijin to make them die from pain alone. He just thought it was so strange. The righteous ways that I know are extremely rare, and have only ever appeared in the Uchiha clan history several times. The techniques usually unlocked by the method you are currently attempting are perhaps the most coveted of the entire clan. One is Koto Amatsukami, the heavenly gods, the ability to enter into a person's mind. You can use your will to command them to do anything, as well as sift through their memories and read their very thoughts. As with all Mangekyu techniques, it has its limitations, but I hardly know what they are since there have been so few Uchiha ever to have them, and they are usually killed very quickly. The second is Omoikan, the deity of wisdom. This power grants the user the ability to look into the future, also an extremely coveted ability for a clan. As you can imagine, most Uchiha who have ever unlocked either of these abilities are immediately targeted by enemy clans because of how dangerous they are. Perhaps even worse, they are often targeted by other Uchiha due to fear, jealousy, or other reasons. The other known powers from a righteous activation normally come from someone who copies over a certain number of jutsu, probably around 2000. Since most Uchiha only have one elemental chakra affinity, it is already hard to master more than 100 techniques. Only a select few have ever accomplished this, and the majority have been fortunate enough to be born with multiple chakra nature affinities. The only technique that has been known to generally unlock from this method is Kamui, which is another term for a supernatural entity made of spiritual chakra. This ability allows the user to gain control over a parallel dimension, from which they can travel to themselves and send others to. I've had the good fortune to meet a Uchiha with this very ability. It would be more accurate to describe righteous ways as methods of obtaining the Mangekyu technique that do not involve killing or sacrificing someone. It is uncommon, but not impossible, for Uchiha to acquire righteous techniques without having the Mangekyu active for 3 days or mastering 2000 techniques. As you might expect, they are all very powerful. Lastly, there are other Mangekyu techniques that can be unlocked, but only after possessing the Mangekyu. I'll go over those with you later, as you can't actually unlock them first. Naruto's thoughts were racing. Though somewhat perplexing, each of the morally upright approaches appeared to be immensely beneficial and potent in its own unique manner. Naruto paused to consider his options before asking, "So which ones do you think I will unlock? You said that it's not always guaranteed. Also, I feel like I've heard you mention Koto Amatsukami before. Didn't you say that Shisui used a technique like that on Itachi?" Through his mind, he sensed Madara's faint nods of approval. "Yes, this is the challenging part of predicting which technique you will acquire. You were right. Shisui had unlocked Koto Amatsukami and ordered Itachi to kill the Uchiha clan, as I told you when you woke up after the massacre. I obviously don't know how or when he unlocked it, but I highly doubt it. It's possible that he passed the 3-day trial covertly in an attempt to persuade Itachi and the rest of his clan to avoid conflict with Konoha. He might have even unlocked it to persuade the council to alter their ways. Or perhaps he unlocked it during his final battle with Itachi and was just fortunate to obtain Koto Amatsukami because his eyes were already extremely powerful when it came to deceptive genjutsu manipulation. You have a very good chance of unlocking that technique first because Shisui had Itachi implant his eyes in you, especially since you are also completing the endurance trial. Since Shisui already had the eyes, I had initially hoped you could activate the Mangekyu without completing the trial. However, the Mangekyu depends on both your spiritual chakra and your eyes. Because my spiritual chakra has unlocked all of the evil techniques, there is a good chance that you will also unlock one, since you have been absorbing my chakra since birth. We'll just have to wait and find out. The next few hours went by without any problems, but by the time the sun was starting to set, Naruto was feeling a little hungry and dehydrated, and by the time he could see the moon in the night sky, he was experiencing for the first time the weariness of having his Sharingan activated for so long. Although he had initially expected to feel sleepy, he was anything but. As the night wore on, he found himself blinking more than usual to try to focus his eyes on anything around him, even though he wasn't sleepy. He wanted to close and rest his eyes, but he knew he couldn't because he would likely lose focus and deactivate his Sharingan the moment he did. Madara had said it would be better for them to stop talking because he didn't want to confuse Naruto when he started hallucinating, apparently. He was taken aback when, gradually but surely, he saw Madara's image appear in front of him, dressed in the full Uchiha body armor he had worn on their previous encounter. Madara, what's going on, is this an illusion already? Naruto exclaimed, pausing to rub his eyes in bewilderment. Madara hummed out loud, his voice as deep and clear as Naruto's often heard in his mind, as he looked down at his own hands and arms, seemingly bewildered himself. Perhaps the amount of spiritual chakra you are sending to your brain and eyes has allowed you to visualize our interactions, he said. Even though I'm still inside your seal, the Sharingan is telling me everything you're seeing. This is such an odd experience. The ancient Uchiha approached him, but Naruto yelled, "Don't get any closer," and held out his hand. I will not allow anything to approach me until I obtain the Mangekyu. I thought I already explained this, you fool. Madara sighed angrily, pinching the bridge of his nose. Your hallucinations don't have to listen to you, he reprimanded, but he chose to remain seated in front of Naruto. You're mistaken if you believe that sitting there is safe. He rubbed his eyes once more, but Madara was still there before him, as clear as the surrounding trees, with the first rays of sunlight peeking through the forest canopy. How can I be certain it's you, though? Naruto asked reluctantly, his mind already a jumble of stress and lack of sleep. I suppose you could ask me after this trial is over, said Madara with a noncommittal shrug. The idea of hallucinations attacking him seemed much more terrifying after he saw the crystal-clear image of Madara sitting in front of him. That seemed reasonable, but what Madara had said earlier was finally beginning to sink in. He claimed that Naruto would actually feel pain during this trial. After guessing Naruto's thoughts, Madara crossed his arms and said, there is no easy way to unlock the Mangekyu. The Mangekyu Sharingan is typically unlocked as a last resort to keep the user from dying or going into emotional ruin. The Mangekyu will, in a sense, evolve to protect you from emotional danger, just as the Sharingan does to protect you from physical danger. You must be in so much mental agony that you risk dying otherwise. The Sharingan evolved for me just before I killed myself, burning away the sword that I was plunging towards my own chest in the black fire of Amaterasu. For me, and for many Uchiha who unlocked the Mangekyu by killing someone close to them, the pain I felt afterward was undoubtedly deadly. This was followed by the shock of killing my closest friend, the shocking reality that we would never laugh together again, the crushing doubt that none of it was worth it, the fear that killing him hadn't even been enough, and that I had just killed my closest friend for nothing, and the terrifying thought that I had failed my family and clan, and that my life wasn't worth living anymore, and that I was better off dead than living with the pain. Nothing will be easier for you than what I went through. As intended, the hallucinations will shatter you. Your mind won't be able to cope with the amount of pain, suffering, and loss you will endure. You probably won't remember any of that as it happens, but the Mangekyu will only save you when you are just seconds away from death. But as long as I keep my Sharingan activated, I can make it right. Naruto said, his mouth feeling drier than before. Madara nodded solemnly. Konoha and Sasuke. Sasuke rolled over and smacked his alarm off seconds before it even went off. Having to wake up this early so many times in a row had given him a keen sense of when he needed to get up before the alarm gave off its usual blast of noise, and within 5 minutes he had brushed his teeth, dressed, and sat in the kitchen eating a small breakfast. Training with Kakashi started early and ended around noon, so he knew he wouldn't have time for breakfast later, so he always ate something small before leaving. He was ready to do this every day for the next few weeks, no matter the cost to ace the Chunin exams. Knock, knock, a knock on his door. No, probably just hearing things. He took another bite and chewed in silence, paying closer attention to his surroundings now in case it had been a knock on his door. Something new interrupted his half-asleep monotonous morning routine, and he froze. Knock, knock. He pushed back from his table, a half-eaten bread roll still in his hand, and walked to his apartment entrance, bewildered. Who could be bothering him at this hour of the morning? He thought of Naruto, who usually just walked in after knocking once and had a spare key to his apartment, but the blonde brat had been skipping the morning trainings lately, so he might be up to something naughty. He activated his Sharingan just in case. She gasped when she looked at him, perhaps because of the whole, "You look like the spitting image of the person who killed my parents and ruined my life," thing, which was probably difficult for her to get over, but he still wished she could just move on. He was shocked to find Gurren standing in front of him, her hand up, ready to knock again, when he finally made it to the door and opened it. "Gurren?" he asked, his brain rapidly trying to wake up and determine why she was here so early. He suddenly remembered his offer for them to train together the other day. "Oh, are you here for training?" "Yes," she said, nodding. "Well, greetings, Sasuke." Even though he was the one who broke her arm in the first place, he was glad that she was good to go again because she was fidgeting with her hands, which made him look down at them curiously. She was wearing a green and purple tunic that was kept tight with a belt around her waist, and some skin-tight shorts underneath it. Her odd blue hair was pulled back in a short ponytail. "Good morning," he replied nonchalantly, gesturing to her with his bread roll. "Come on in," he said, "we have a few minutes left before we have to leave, and I'm still eating breakfast. Oh, and let your friends know that they are welcome to join you if they so choose." Her eyes widened in shock at this point. "Buddies? What, friends?" Lazily, he pointed his finger out the door into the nearby rooftop where he could see the chakra presences of two people hiding behind some kind of air conditioning unit, raising an eyebrow in bewilderment as he took another bite of bread. She turned around right away and placed her hands on her hips, yelling, "Come out." Maybe she could now feel them too. "I am aware that you are following me." Sasuke laughed as he saw Utakata and Kimimaro leap out from behind cover and land in the hallway he and Gurren were currently in after jumping across the rooftops. "Do you guys also intend to train with us?" "I only agreed to train with Gurren because she isn't competing," Sasuke said before Gurren could respond. "I won't reveal my training secrets to you because I'm likely to face you guys in the finals." Before they could respond, Gurren interrupted, saying, "Why are you two following me here?" She asked incredulously, as if her anger were overwhelming her. "It's unbelievable that you didn't believe me, you jerk." When she yelled that last line, she was glaring at Utakata, who raised his hands in defense, saying, "Hey, Kimimaro-sama and I both followed you, so why are you only yelling at me?" Although they both competed in the Chunin exams, which baffled him greatly, Gurren had previously told Sasuke that Kimimaro was somehow her boss, even though he knew very little about how Akatsuki managed their bizarre ninja organization. "Calm down you two," Kimimaro, who was wearing his typical smile, decided to mediate. He and Utakata were dressed normally, in shorts and shirts, rather than their typical Akatsuki outfits. "Gurren, Utakata, and I were just looking out for your well-being," he said. "You have been behaving oddly lately, and this morning you informed us that you were going to train with a friend." Gurren looked at Sasuke in silent embarrassment as her face suddenly heated up. Why would she feel embarrassed by any of this? After a pause, Utakata explained, "I bet with Kimimaro-sama that you were lying because I know for a fact that you don't have any friends in AIM and I know that there's no way in hell you've made any friends here. We came here to verify his suspicion that you weren't. All you have to do is confirm or deny it, Uchiha-san," he said grimly, turning to face Sasuke. "I have a lot riding on this," he said. "Do you and Gurren have a friendship?" With a very serious air about them, all three of the Akatsuki turned to face him. Kimimaro looked like he was about to lose it. Utakata looked like he was sure he was going to make a lot of money, and Gurren looked like she wanted to hit out at anyone at any time. They likely reasoned that since Gurren had attempted to kill him in the previous weeks, there was no possibility that they could be friends. As of the last few days, Gurren and I are friends, with benefits, he said, putting on the most somber and composed expression he could. We are in a romantic relationship. Kimimaro was the first to break the awkward silence, and their intense expressions instantly changed to ones of morbid shock and disbelief, even though Sasuke loved the surprise on Gurren's face and was careful not to smile even a little. Gurren, congratulations. With a sincere smile, he said, I'm happy you found someone. Utakata was not pleased, saying, I don't believe it at all. Gurren would never be dated. The brown-haired bubble master was able to raise his arms in defense just in time, and although he was pushed back a good distance, his relaxed aura instantly vanished and was replaced by one full of rage. Gurren's look of embarrassment and anger was directed from Sasuke to Kimimaro before finally settling on Utakata. Perhaps sensing that he was the most suitable person to vent it on, she spun and kicked out at Utakata with fierce speed and power. He strode forward with a menacing expression in his eye, taunting, classic Gurren, always lashing out in anger, explaining why I don't trust you. Additionally, don't give away what you can't handle. He whirled to deliver his own roundhouse kick, prepared to retaliate in what seemed to be a routine duel between them. Before Gurren could even react, Sasuke made the decision to intervene and stop the attack, grabbing Utakata's foot with ease and using his Sharingan to track it, then casually pushing it back while Utakata stared at him bewildered. I'm not going to stand here and let you attack my girlfriend in front of me, he said coolly, taking another bite of his bread while his hair fluttered in the morning breeze. I'm assuming you're jealous of her because you can't get a girlfriend for yourself. Sasuke felt Gurren slowly approach him, and he fully expected the game to end with him somehow getting punched in place of Utakata. To his utter surprise, she ended up linking her arm with his and giving Utakata a smugly pointed look. Utakata's jaw dropped, and the white-haired Kimimaro burst out laughing at his teammate's expense. Stop being jealous, Utakata, she reprimanded, choosing to comply with his behavior. I just spent so much time with weak incompetents like you that I couldn't help but fall for the first guy our age who was stronger than me, she said. Sasuke, ignore him, he's probably just lonely. It appeared as though Utakata had been punched in the stomach, and oddly, Kimimaro had also taken offense. Hey, what about me? You couldn't spare any love for the guy who chose you to be his partner? He asked in a playful manner. You're my boss, Gurren said, leaning her head into Sasuke's arm and shrugging. It isn't relevant. Sasuke and Gurren continued the bizarre performance until Utakata and Kimimaro finally left, the former nearly crying, likely tears of rage at being humiliated and losing some cash to Kimimaro, but it still made Gurren laugh uncontrollably on entering his apartment with him. When Sasuke finally used his free hand to finish his role, he said, You can let go of my arm, you know, unless you were serious about the dating thing. Finally defending herself, she said, it was just too easy of a way to get back at Utakata, adding, he's always calling me a friendless, angry loner who no one would date. She stopped laughing and shook away from him, her face actually starting to flush again in embarrassment. Without having the time to probe her violent relationship with her teammate, Sasuke hurriedly gathered up his tools and shoved another piece of bread into his mouth before leaving the room with Gurren at his heels. He couldn't help but raise an eyebrow at her in silence, and he could totally understand why someone would think that about her, because it was mostly true. He was eager to see what Kakashi had in store for him today, especially since he had another training partner to spar with. The Hinata, she always loved being outside, and now that she was finally released from the hospital, she was no longer confined to a single, small, cramped hospital room, so even though she had a lonely day yesterday, Hinata couldn't help but smile as she stepped outside the hospital doors and felt the wonderful rays of sunshine and listened to the beautiful sounds of nature around her. With Makeout Paradise on her lap, ready to read, she had been eagerly anticipating Naruto's visit yesterday, but she couldn't figure out why he hadn't stopped by. Had he been too awkward reading the book with her? No, he was laughing through most of it. Had he been embarrassed by kissing her nose before he left? That didn't make sense either, since he was the one who came up with the idea. Was he regretting asking her out? She had been putting a lot of pressure on him to ask her out. Perhaps he had done so under duress and regretted it right away. She tried to calm herself by taking a deep breath. Naruto-kun had promised her a date, and she would go through with it. There was no turning back now, and he would have to tell her directly if he wanted to cancel, and she wouldn't accept no as an answer. She decided to go straight to Naruto's apartment to tell him that she was free, but she stopped short after taking a few steps, gasping, because she couldn't go on a date like this. She needed to take a shower, change into something nice, and make sure her hair wasn't a mess. The Senju warrior spun around in the opposite direction and ran off to her own house to make sure she was ready to see her love interest again. She was feeling gorgeous, her face was starting to flush at the thought of him, and she felt as though she was walking on a cloud. Her crazy smile was probably incomprehensible to anyone who saw her, but she couldn't help the love that was pulsing through her entire body. Naruto. As Hinata started to approach him in the forest clearing, the young, blonde Uchiha couldn't help but groan in despair, knowing that this was going to be the worst day of his life. It had only been a day and a half since he began this trial, and the hallucinations were becoming as clear as ever, along with the casual strain of maintaining a proper chakra flow to his head. He only hoped that the visions wouldn't start turning painful just yet. "Hi, Naruto-kun," with her voice as gentle and lovely as ever, Hinata-chan called out to him. Could she really be the one? Had she come out here to find him? The old warlord who was still seated beside him, Madara, grunted his disapproval. "Naruto," he spat out sharply, his arms crossed and his face glaring impassively. "She's not real. From now on, you have to assume that nothing is real. Even I am under suspicion." When Hinata was told that she wasn't real, she didn't seem to mind. She went up to Naruto, and even though he waved his hand to tell her to back off, she giggled and sat down on the grassy floor. "What are you up to?" He let out a sigh of frustration and tiredness, pausing to massage his constantly hurting eyes. "Hinata-chan, please," he pleaded, his voice a little rough after several hours of silence, "don't talk to me now. You're an illusion, and I know it. This is going to be difficult for me because of you." She used her pearly eyes and pouted as usual, asking, "Why are you treating me badly? You have no idea how depressing it has been for me to be in the hospital alone. I've already started crying when I consider how you left me without telling me why." Having been so preoccupied with the task at hand that he had not even considered going to the hospital before he left, Naruto mentally cursed. Hinata-chan would likely be sitting by herself for 3 days straight, wondering why he wasn't coming to see her, or worse, she would be released from the hospital and believe that he was deliberately trying to avoid her. Hinata leaned her head against his shoulder and sighed quietly. "It's okay, Naruto-kun," she said, her voice slightly melancholy, "and I'll help you however I can. Please let me stay with you, I won't say anything." She began to rub his back as she leaned against him, and he felt a twinge of guilt. Madara had been correct about these illusions thus far. She sounded and looked like Hinata, and even though he knew he was sitting alone in the middle of the forest, he could feel her soft hand caressing his back. He wanted to tell her to leave, but she was here, and after being alone for so long, he felt really good. His shoulders and back were extremely stiff from sitting for so long, and he was tempted to lie down, but he knew that he would faint and that it would have been for nothing. He listened to the steady breath of Hinata leaning against him and the soft rustle of the trees as he sat in peaceful silence for a few minutes. Naturally, Madara, who, as Naruto always saw him, chose to ruin the first calm he had experienced of the day by muttering his own sinister warning. "Most Uchiha struggle reaching this point because of chakra limitations," he said, remaining motionless in his seat, adding, "You've done well to make it this far. But the chakra you've stolen from me throughout your life is the only reason for it. The last day won't be as simple, I promise. Keep in mind that 3 days is an estimate rather than an actual number. Until you reach the Mangekyo, you have to maintain the Sharingan active. Naruto, practically all of your actual power has been bestowed upon you since birth. If you want to get stronger this time, you'll have to work for it." He knew that the next day would likely be the worst of his life, but he decided to try and enjoy the quiet calm he felt now with the false but consoling presence of his closet friend. So Naruto decided to ignore him, which, if he recalled correctly, was Madara's own recommendation. Sasuke. Evening for the most part, training with Kakashi had taken place from dawn until dusk. His masked sensei had finally called it a day as the sun was beginning to set, leaving him and Gurren sweaty and exhausted but proud of their diligent efforts. It was never easy to train. However, it came with the amazing feeling of accomplishment that he was getting closer to facing Itachi and a little bit stronger. It turned out that Gurren felt the same way. After all, Itachi was their target, and they were both Avengers. After they were done, Sasuke had been fortunate enough to witness the loudest growl he had ever heard come from Gurren's stomach. Of course, to her horror and his amusement. However, he shook his head and asked after giggling at her for a good few seconds. "Hold on, did you not have breakfast?" Presumably to conceal her embarrassment, she looked sideways and proudly stuck her chin up. "It didn't know the training would last so long. You could have told me it would go past lunch, you know." When he realized it was true, he winced. He probably ought to have advised her to pack a light lunch or eat breakfast first. He might as well offer to get her some food if he was partially to blame for her hunger. As they left the training grounds together, he asked nonchalantly, "Do you want to go grab some dinner with me then?" As he wondered where they could eat, he ran a hand through his hair. "I could treat you to another restaurant downtown if you'd like." Her expression changed to one of surprise as she turned to face him. "Really? You'd treat me out to eat again?" "Yeah, of course," he said, grinning candidly. "I had fun today training with someone new. Thanks for taking the risk by accepting my offer. And I also enjoyed the last date we went on anyway." She wanted to continue yelling, it wasn't a date, as she often did, and he could tell that. Fortunately, she did respond loudly enough. She firmly stated, "I don't remember ever accepting to go on a date with you. And just because we go eating together doesn't make it a date." He gave an eye roll. He said, "Well then consider me a gentleman," and he made a flourishing gesture. "Maybe the other day was different, all things considering. But tonight, I'm offering to take you out to dinner and pay for you in order to spend some more time with you. That's a date. So do you want to go or not?" Sasuke had come home to take a shower and change his clothes approximately an hour later. She had agreed to go out to dinner with him, even though her face would occasionally flush in either embarrassment or rage, though he was still unable to tell which it was. He knew enough about women to know that was not the whole truth, but she had said it was because she was so hungry and would get to rub it in Utakata's face. With Gurren, it was like running up a waterfall, but he couldn't help but wonder how many girls in this village would kill to give him the opportunity to ask them out. He wasn't totally sure why he even wanted to go on a date with someone who was so hesitant. He couldn't help but want to, though. He wanted to make her swoon for him even more because of her resistance to his charm. As if to validate his extraordinary skills. In addition, she was somewhat attractive. After waiting for no more than 30 minutes, he heard someone knock on his door. "Come in. Door's open," he exclaimed, before putting on his nicer watch and giving his hair one final brush. Who the devil was he kidding? Anything more would have been overkill. He likely looked better than anyone else in the village the moment he got out of bed. After removing her sandals, of course, Gurren entered his main entrance wearing a somewhat anxious expression. He waved her over with his trademark smile. He said, "Glad you made it," as he headed to his kitchen table to make his final adjustments. His smile widened slightly as he examined her from head to toe. "You look really nice. What took you so long?" At his casual compliment, she blushed a little and looked away. She obviously wasn't accustomed to such a compliment. However, it was true that she looked good in a simple yet comfortable knee-length skirt and a feminine green shirt. She crossed her arms and said, "I had to make sure that I wasn't followed," after being told she took a long time. "Utakata is the type of guy who wouldn't believe that we are dating even after this morning, so he might have tried to tail me." Sasuke's eyebrows arched. "So you're saying that he's the type of guy who's usually right about his gut feeling?" Ignoring his answer completely, she impatiently asked, "Are we going or not?" After all, Utakata was technically right to have doubts about their relationship. "There's something really important that I want to talk with you about." He was intrigued by this. Something truly significant. He could only think of two things that were truly significant between them. Their friendship and Itachi. He hoped it was about Itachi, but she might have taken this morning's jokes more seriously than he had meant, given her complete lack of social experience. In the end, despite the enormous crowds the Chunin exams brought in, they had strolled downtown together and discovered a restaurant that still had some open seating inside. Sasuke noticed several ninja wearing headbands from each of the major ninja villages, as well as a few smaller ones, as he made his way to his seat. Ninja from other villages used the excuse to travel to Konoha, watch the fights, and take in the enormous festivals, despite the fact that only Akatsuki and the Sand and Leaf Village were competing in the finals. Before long, they had placed their food orders and were sitting across from one another, silently staring at each other. Eventually, Sasuke sighed, realizing that Gurren lacked much experience in this area. As if it were the simplest thing in the world, he asked bluntly, "So, now that we are officially going on dates together, do you want to start going out for real?" Indeed, it was for him. "Do you want to be my girlfriend? I think we can work out the long-distance relationship. Distance makes the heart grow fonder, or so they say." His thoughts kept returning to Sakura. He didn't think she was particularly remarkable, but he thought he might as well try dating since they had gotten off to a good start. However, her desire to see him daily interfered with his training regimen. Her priorities weren't the same as his. Until he killed Itachi and began rebuilding the Uchiha clan, perhaps a long-distance relationship would be the best course of action for him now. At his direct questions, Gurren flushed and averted his piercing gaze. Checking to make sure no one had heard him, she asked incredulously, what? You can't just ask me out like that. Oh, so she understood social relationships completely now. Why not? He inquired, his confidence and charismatic demeanor unfazed. I just did. Even though the restaurant was noisy enough with the busy patrons, she went on, we hardly even know each other. While maintaining a low enough voice to avoid disturbing anyone nearby. And I'm in the Akatsuki. We could never see each other. Ignoring the distance, he shrugged. So, does the Amikage have rules about dating or something? Plus, I'm busy with training, and you're busy with training. Maybe writing letters to each other and visiting once a month or so will be enough for us. I'm not asking you to move in with me or anything. To his amusement, she had yet to say, no, despite her apparent internal conflict. But we haven't even been friends for a week yet. Do you even, love me? He tried to avoid snorting and rolled his eyes. He chose to teach her, dating is not all about love, Gurren, as he was an expert in romance. It's not the end of the world. I recently broke up with a girl I'd been seeing for a while just before I met you the other night. Breaking up is terrible, but you can't stop yourself from enjoying life's little pleasures just because you might get hurt. You have to take chances. Agreeing to date someone doesn't mean you'll marry them. I took a chance by asking you out right now, and even though it didn't work out, I'm still glad I did it. Maybe you'll say, yes, but who cares? I thought dating you would be fun, so why not ask? He and our other teammate, Naruto, have been in love for as long as I've known them, but they haven't done anything about it because they're both too scared to take the first step. Every month that passes is a month that they could have been dating, but they're missing out on it for no other reason than fear. I'm not like that. Gurren had been listening intently to everything he had to say, but he could tell she wasn't as daring as he was. There was really no reason why she shouldn't date him. He had an amazing lineage, was talented, kind, attractive, and so much more. Unless she was a man-hater. Hold on, did she not enjoy men? She finally interrupted him to say, I'm sorry, before he could inquire about her leaning direction. Not everyone is as quick or fearless as you, Sasuke. I know I'm not. If I fall in love with someone and it doesn't work out, I don't think I would be able to recover as easily as you. He gave another shrug. You never know until you try. And you'll never fall in love until you try either. You can't love someone just by thinking they are good looking or nice from afar. I'm pretty sure that's just infatuation. Love isn't an emotion, as far as I know. Hatred and infatuation are emotions. You can still love someone, even if in that current moment, you hate their guts. You probably won't know if you love someone until after you get angry at them at some point, since love outlasts hate and anger. You don't date someone because you love them, in my opinion, you date them to find out if you can grow to love them. She appeared to comprehend his words. When they first arrived, they both ordered tea, which the waiter returned with. He thanked the waiter, picked up his cup, blew on it, and took a cautious sip. She looked at him anxiously and asked again in a whisper, do you think you could love me, then? Over the crowd, he could hardly hear her. Why? He had the clear impression that her heart was in his grasp and that his answer would either break it or imprison it in place for all time. He chose to settle for honesty despite the overwhelming temptation to win her over with meaningless romantic words of non-existent dedication. I'm not entirely sure, he said cautiously, putting down the cup. But I think you have the potential. Which is why I want to date you for real. You're pretty, incredibly talented and motivated, and understand my dreams better than any other girl I've ever met. My number one goal right now is to get stronger in order to face Itachi. But if along the way, I end up falling in love with someone like you, that's great. I need to find someone to rebuild the Uchiha clan with, after all. He was reminded that she could actually look pretty cute when she wasn't actively trying to kill him when she flushed once more. In any event, he was primarily looking for a cute girl who was committed to training. She took a nervous sip from her own cup and then apologized once more. Everything you've said makes sense, but I don't think I'm ready to date anyone right now. You're honestly the first friend I've ever had, and I appreciate everything you've done for me in the past few days. But I've spent my whole life isolating myself from others, and it just feels impossible to completely let that up now. I'd have no one to go to for advice. And I'd lose my only friend if we ended up hating each other. I know that probably doesn't make sense to you, but I'm not ready to date just yet." Once more, Sasuke shrugged. This was the first time he had ever been rejected by a girl, despite his recent assertion that rejection didn't matter. "Man, you're something else," he thought out loud while grinning at her. "I don't know many girls who would turn me down like that. I'm pretty famous here, you know. And did I mention that I'm ridiculously wealthy after inheriting half of the Uchiha clan's fortune? I could buy this restaurant without having to worry about hurting my wallet." He eventually made her laugh, which may have relieved some of the tension that had been building. "Oh, you're rich," she cried, pretending to be surprised. "That changes everything. Marry me now, Sasuke Uchiha." "I should have started with that, damn it," he said, laughing as he shook his head in playful annoyance. "That's what I'll do next time." After his remark, she stopped laughing, for better or worse. "Next time?" she inquired, furrowing her brows in perplexity. "What does that mean?" He went on to say, "You can't just reserve Sasuke Uchiha until you make up your mind," and he was a little relieved to see that she wasn't as conflicted as she had made herself out to be. "I offered my good looks, fortune, and care to you, and you rejected me. On to the next girl. I've got a clan to rebuild, you know." Even though his remark was only half serious, Guren's expression darkened and she appeared to retreat back to herself. It wasn't his fault. After all, he wasn't going to feel bad for the girl who had just turned him down. Fortunately for him, another waitress arrived with their food orders and set them down in front of them. Although they were both starving, they jumped right in. The cuisine was excellent. He could see that she was obviously enjoying it too, because Guren had just devoured the majority of her plate in a matter of minutes. He could see that something was still bothering her, despite the fact that she was eating contentedly, and it was obviously not his romantic advances. He couldn't help but wonder if Itachi or even the Akatsuki had anything to do with it. He chose to ask her as she was finishing a bite of food, "So what did you want to talk with me about? What's bothering you, apart from attractive and wealthy men asking you out on dates?" Her face soured abruptly, and she unconsciously pushed the plate slightly away from her, suggesting that his mention of the possible problem was enough to make her lose her appetite. His joke did not even elicit a response from her. He was not going to start the guessing game on something he didn't know anything about, so he patiently waited for her to have the guts to begin. "It's about Itachi," she said, staring at him with a mixture of worry and resentment. Even though Sasuke had initially assumed it might be about Itachi, the mention of his murderous brother caused him to clench his fists and become aware of his heart rate rising. What was it she knew? Itachi Uchiha is part of Akatsuki now. Unavoidably, his eyes widened in shock. Was Itachi a member of Akatsuki? The same group that Guren was a member of and Orochimaru had reportedly joined. His mind whirled with the realization, and he was forced to recline in his chair. His mission was no longer to find Itachi. He was aware that ninja from all walks of life turned to Akatsuki in order to start over, regardless of their past. Renegades were offered redemption by the Amekage. Though he didn't believe any organization would want him, he had thought about the possibility that Itachi might want to do the same. How could a ninja who killed and betrayed his own clan be hired by the Amekage? Who would put their trust in such a person? Who would put their trust in someone so strong? "I should start from the beginning," Guren said emphatically as she hurried in. It was impossible for anyone to hear them over the roar of the crowd. As you may have already guessed, Orochimaru-sama used to be a member of Akatsuki. He was a commander, the highest rank in Akatsuki, and was in charge of thousands of people. He betrayed the Amekage's trust by attacking your team during the Chunin exams, but he also paid me a visit in the forest after you stole my scroll. Back then, you told me that your brother Itachi had killed your clan and most likely my parents. You might not recall this now. That was confirmed by Orochimaru, who also informed me that Itachi would most likely take his place in Akatsuki. I didn't confirm the truth until after the exams. Kimimaro-sama was summoned back to aim to witness Itachi's inauguration as Akatsuki's sixth commander, succeeding Orochimaru. Though he found it odd that Kimimaro had to be present for the swearing-in of a commander, Sasuke remained silent, unsure of how to react, and prudently chose not to risk asking her, instead waiting to see if Guren had anything more to say. After a long minute of waiting, she took a deep breath and went on. Itachi is currently a part of the organization that I work for, and he is ranked above me, she said quietly, her voice full of anger and despair. That's a part of the reason why I had decided to take my life, she said. He is protected by the Amekage and is free to give me any direct orders he wants. The Amekage himself would kill me even if I were to ever become strong enough to engage Itachi in combat. Every commander has a unique ring that allows them to speak with the Amekage directly. If Itachi thought that his life was in danger, the Amekage could react right away and save his life. The Amekage can even enter people's minds, which is even worse. He will kill me for treason before I have a chance if he somehow discovers that I intend to kill Itachi. I simply no longer have any hope. She ended her sentence with tears in her eyes, and Sasuke felt a wave of dread wash over him as well. If Itachi was a member of Akatsuki, and a commander at that, then attacking him would be considered an act of war, and the Leaf Village would not stand by him. Even if he were to become strong enough to kill Itachi one day, he would now have to risk igniting the next great ninja war by doing so. Akatsuki could respond by destroying the Leaf Village. How many more clans would perish for Sasuke's vengeance? Holy crap. He looked back up at her with concern on his face and said, "That's not good," exhaling deeply but not letting the tension leave him in the least. "But you're still a part of Akatsuki," he said. "What will you do at this point?" She probably didn't have an answer, but he couldn't help but ask her to see what she was thinking, and that was obviously the golden question that she had attempted to answer the night he saved her. Her voice cracked as she said, "I don't know," demonstrating how difficult it was for her to control her emotions. "At this point, I could even be killed for treason just by telling you everything that I just did," she said. "My teammates may report me to the Amekage if I tell them that I intend to kill Itachi. I had no one to ask for assistance. But I have you now." Before answering her, he extended his hand and took hers, giving it a slight squeeze, and closed his eyes for a moment to try to control his own feelings, to think this through calmly and clearly, to do his best to support her as a friend. "We'll figure something out," he said, grinning weakly but honestly, "because this is awful. Even though you may be feeling hopeless right now, I am confident that we can find a solution. You are no longer alone in this. Together, we're in this." They had only a few short weeks left here in the Leaf Village before she returned to AIM, and they had to figure out what they could do about all of this before the exams ended. She squeezed his hand back, and even though a single tear broke free and fell down the side of Gurren's face, she managed to smile back at him with genuine appreciation. The morning after, on the third morning of his trial, Naruto Uchiha never saw the sun rise. He believed that if it weren't for the watch he wore, he wouldn't even know what time it was. The last time he checked his watch, it was slowing down so rapidly that he was certain it had stopped working completely, so he threw it away in frustration in the forest. The last time he remembered, the sky was crimson, and in the many hours that followed, the sky had only seemed to grow redder. To make matters worse, the clouds were passing overhead so quickly that it appeared as though he was witnessing a time lapse. He was trapped in whatever delusion his eyes were giving him, and he knew that this was no longer his world. He was anything but exhausted, though. He was sweating, trembling a little, and out of breath, and his heart was pounding, much like when he was doing his final push-ups before collapsing. More than anything, he wanted to stop the dwindling flow of chakra to his brain and deactivate the Sharingan, but he knew he couldn't. For the first time so far, he was actually beginning to feel real fear, but he had come this far. Hinata had also disappeared at some point during the night, and Madara was nowhere to be found. He was alone in this haunted forest, with the clouds passing by like. "Hi there, younger sibling." The familiar voice made his heart skip a beat, and as he turned to look behind him, he saw his deceased older brother Shisui Uchiha smiling and leaning against a tree. "Please, don't do this." As quickly as he had ever moved in his life, Shisui glowed out of existence and materialized directly in front of him. "What's wrong, Naruto? You don't look so good," he said with genuine concern in his voice. How could he forget that Shisui's Sharingan had been implanted in Naruto? Blood was streaming down Shisui's empty and closed eyelids. "How have things been going for you with my eyes?" Even though Naruto had turned away from him in disgust and horror, he chose to ask politely, "You finally have a Sharingan, congratulations, Naruto. I've always thought of you as a true Uchiha, but this, I suppose, makes it official." He was no longer in the forest clearing where he had been sitting for the past 2 days, and he was not alone either. Naruto was startled to see that Sasuke and Hinata were both tied to the logs next to him, both of them gagged and wearing blindfolds. Naruto was suddenly tied to a log, the same one at the training grounds where he and his team had spent so many hours honing their skills. Shisui, putting a hand on Naruto's shoulder and ignoring his bound teammates, said, "Naruto, there's something very important I need to tell you," adding, "I think that this is a trap, Naruto." Regarding how to unlock the Mangekyu, I believe Madara is telling you lies. He is allowing all of his spiritual chakra to flow into your brain while weakening your body. Naruto, he intends to take you over permanently. I believe he is planning something sinister because he is not imprisoned like the Nine Tails are. Now you must stop the flow. Get my Sharingan deactivated before it's too late. Even though Naruto knew that this was a complete fabrication and that his mind would stop at nothing to convince him to deactivate it, the sight of his brother after all this time was tearing his heart apart, and he was unable to stop the tears from streaming down his face as he choked back a sob. Naruto, you must have faith in me. Madara is evil, Shisui begged, holding on to his shoulder even more tightly. You're being used by him. For your benefit, why would he do anything? You're allowing him to escape with the Nine Tails, which is all he wants after being imprisoned inside you for years. Before it's too late, you must deactivate your Sharingan. Deciding that it was too painful to look at Shisui's bloody face, Naruto turned his head and closed his eyes, if only for a moment. He had to resist. Shisui was dead, and Naruto had decided to trust Madara. Even if what Shisui was saying made sense, he didn't trust his sleep-deprived and hallucinating mind to try and think hard about it. He had told himself that he would stick this out no matter what, and that's what he was going to do. Right. Madara would advise you to do precisely that. His ultimate goal is to escape, Shisui begged him, his voice full of urgency and fear. What else is a prisoner trying to achieve? Everything he tells you must eventually lead to his escape strategy. Any little detail along the way could have been a lie from him. What if your brain is truly destroyed by keeping your Sharingan active for this long, giving Madara permanent control? In order to, he would tell you anything. SCHLNK. Shisui's voice was abruptly interrupted, and Naruto felt a spray of hot liquid cover his face. He opened his eyes and looked forward, bewildered, to see a bloody katana protruding from Shisui's chest just inches from his face. The blade retracted with that same reprehensible sound, and Shisui was kicked to the side, with Itachi standing behind him, his eyes cold and murderous. As he flicked the blood from his blade, Itachi informed him, Madara lies, as though murdering Shisui were a routine task for him. Lying by omission. Here, in this world you have made, you will willingly die. As long as Madara uses your body for his own ends, you will remain imprisoned in this hell forever. He lies like this. You're unaware of the reality. The events of the night you acquired the Sharingan aren't really known to you, are they? Do not pay any attention to him. You believe that I killed the clan by myself after Shisui used genjutsu on me and the village elders put pressure on me. That's not entirely accurate. Even if you were unconscious at the time, everything was visible to your eyes. Your Sharingan witnessed the actual event. All this time, the actual truth has been hidden in the recesses of your thoughts. Suddenly, Naruto found himself standing next to Itachi in front of the Uchiha clan compound, the sky still red and the clouds black, passing by even more quickly than before, and he was certain that he was in a horrible flashback because he saw a Uchiha guard still at the clan entrance. He walked forward against his will with Itachi into the clan, and when Itachi looked at him, the guard fell and died, and Naruto finally let out a frustrated scream. No, please stop this. Why are you displaying this to me? He wondered if he would survive Itachi entering the compound and killing the clan members, if he would have to witness Itachi murdering everyone. To his astonishment, he leapt high into the air as soon as he entered the gate, high enough to reach his gorgeous home, and an intense and burning feeling of hatred overcame his heart. Amaterasu. This was a Mangekyu technique that Madara had just explained to him, so why in the world did he just manage to use it on his own clan? Did this explain the scorch marks surrounding the compound in its ruin even now? The entire compound instantly erupted into black flames, and the flames rose high into the sky. The heat was so intense that he wasn't surprised when some nearby houses actually lighted in a normal yellow fire. The Uchiha clan woke up in the dead of night to discover their own compound under attack, and by the time he landed, there were already a lot of screams resonating in the far-off streets. It was exactly as he had imagined it had happened, only he was right in the middle of it. Naruto had never been inside the restaurant and had never really had a chance to see what it was like after the massacre either, but when he returned many times after the fact, this was one of the many places that had been completely destroyed beyond recognition, and he had no idea what jutsu Itachi had. He approached a late-night restaurant that was still packed with people eating and drinking despite the late hour, and they must have been inebriated enough not to hear or care about the commotion going on. The same weird feeling of hatred arose in his chest as before. Susanoo. The word rang true in his mind, and he let his energy run wild, only to be shocked to see crimson chakra erupting around him, creating something monstrous. In an instant, a giant ribcage covered in his crimson chakra, a massive skeletal arm resembling Kimamaro's own creation, massive bones growing around his body, and a clenched fist the size of a house ant. Bam! Itachi was nowhere to be seen. It was him who had just done this. No, that didn't make any sense. The enormous skeletal abomination slammed its fist down into the restaurant in front of him without him even moving, instantly killing the dozens of unprepared people inside it. Naruto could only choke back a horrified cry as the crimson fist lifted, revealing the terrible image of the destroyed place, which looked exactly like it did in Naruto's memory. He turned to see dozens of Uchiha police and ninja in the streets, weaving familiar hand seals and yelling in horror. "Traitor!" One of them shouted out at him, above the roar of the crowds filling the street. It looked like Kenichi-san, the shop owner who had sold him his very own Uchiha brand shirt. "We trusted you, Naruto." Naruto felt his words pierce his chest. The old man finished his hand seals and spat a good-sized fireball at him, which brushed over the chakra-covered skeletal creature around him like a soft breeze. Naruto saw his own hand swing sideways, and then the skeletal arm sweep across the street, crushing the dozens of ninjas that were swarming to attack him. Kenichi-san was slammed into a building before falling to the ground, bloody and dead. "The clan that I once led to greatness has deteriorated into these pitiful creatures that die without a fight." "Pitiful ants," Naruto said, although the voice sounded strange to him. Unaware of an attack on the compound, drinking in the middle of the night. "I would have already faced a dozen clan elders hundreds of years ago, all of whom would have called forth the Susanoo, along with innumerable others who would have slashed through the wind or hurled black flames at me. Shameful. This was a nightmare, this was a nightmare, this couldn't be true, this had to be a nightmare." He ran forward, burning alive everyone in his path, crushing those who avoided him, destroying the young and old, the friends he had known, and everyone who stared at him with angry, broken trust eyes. "Are you able to see now?" When Naruto screamed and jerked his head up, he found himself tied to the log once more in the training field, with Sasuke and Hinata tied next to him. Astonishingly, Jiraiya-sama was standing over him, looking disgusted. He knew it had all been a vision, but he couldn't help but quickly lower his head and cry uncontrollably. Jiraiya said, "Your father died sealing Madara within you to protect the village, and then spit out in disdain. And you've allowed him to take over your body on several occasions. I've attempted to keep him away from you for this reason. He will use you to murder everyone else in the village, just as he used you to murder the Uchiha. It would be much safer for Konoha if I just killed you and took the nine tails out. Perhaps the next Jinchuriki will genuinely give a damn." Naruto shook his head violently, unable to even move past his sobs to ask for assistance or forgiveness, and all he could do was watch as Jiraiya pulled out a kunai and got ready to hurl it at him. This couldn't be real, this was all a dream, right? He wouldn't feel pain, and if he was hurt, he would simply wake up from the vision, right? After all, pain was always a sure way to get out of genjutsu, and... Thunk! As he heard the thrown kunai burrow into his chest and break through his sternum, Naruto looked down in horror. He thought back to his academy ninja training on how to heal a chest wound like his, but his arms were tied behind his back, and the pain was so intense and indescribable that all he could do was scream out in agony. The only sound that followed was a gasp for air. The kunai must have gone straight into a lung that was now filling with blood. "Aid me." As he attempted to mouth, blood filled his mouth, and when he looked up, he saw Itachi standing in front of him once more. To make matters worse, Sasuke and Hinata, who were still gagged and bound to the logs next to him, were in front of two clones of Itachi, all three of whom were brandishing long katanas that were aimed straight down at the captured. He knew he was next, and when he heard his teammates' muffled screams, he looked in dulled horror to see they had been stabbed. At this point, all he wanted was to die, to wake up in bed, and for everything to be. HN. He grunted as cold metal slid slowly into his stomach. He knew he was dying, but the release of death was not nearly as sweet as he had expected. Instead, it was pain, pain, and pain, and... "Hi there, younger sibling." When he blinked once more, Shisui appeared in front of him, wearing the same easy smile he had been wearing earlier, and the blood streaming from his older brother's eyes appeared to be as fresh as it had been moments before. Naruto glanced to his left and right and saw that Sasuke and Hinata were no longer there, and when he looked down at his own body, he saw that all of the mortal wounds he had just sustained had disappeared. "You see, little brother," Shisui went on, oblivious to or indifferent to the fact that Itachi had just killed him. Madara always lies. He may have overlooked a crucial detail, but it's possible that you can unlock the Mangekyo by keeping your Sharingan active for as long as possible. This whole mess has two clear consequences. The first is that you deactivate the Sharingan too soon and put an end to it all. The other is that to get through the chaos of the visions, your eyes transform into the Mangekyo. The third was not mentioned by Madara. You will perish if you refuse to turn off the Sharingan and your eyes aren't strong enough to see through this illusion. Sasuke and Hinata took Shisui's place, both of them staring down at him with visibly bitter eyes. "You're going to die here, Naruto," Sasuke said icily, scowling and crossing his arms. "You'll either die or give up. Naturally, when you reach your ultimate point of vulnerability, Madara may once more seize control. Don't you recall the previous events when Madara took control?" The scene changed quickly once more, but this time Naruto was outside on a hard floor with mist in the air, and when he looked around, he saw that a dozen mirrors of ice were all around him. Sasuke was lying injured on the ground a short distance away, and Hinata was lying on the ground next to him, unconscious but obviously hurt. "Naruto, watch out for the mirrors. She can teleport from one to another, but she can't attack you directly unless she," his friend yelled at him, tears of anguish and relief streaming down his cheeks. Naruto's focus was drawn to the ninja he had encountered in the Land of Waves, Haku, before whom he had allowed Madara to take control of his body in order to save his friends at the bridge. He had no doubts about this at this point. Through his ears, he heard Madara say, "You should have killed me," in a voice that sounded dark and foreign. "Your mission ends here." Naruto had no idea how this fight would go. He had been unconscious after all, but he suddenly feared that he would have to endure the agony of multiple needles impaling him when he recalled that Haku had a bloodline limit that allowed her to combine wind and water chakra to form ice ninjutsu, which she apparently was trying to use against him in this very moment. Fujin. The air around him briefly shimmered before a barely perceptible pulse was sent toward Haku with incredible speed, despite the ice ninja's best efforts to avoid the attack. The word was spoken by Madara, and Naruto felt his eyes pulse with hatred and chakra, focused on Haku. She fell to the ground screaming in pain, but to her credit, she attempted to seal the wound with her free hand to stop the alarming amount of blood that was gushing out. Sasuke started yelling at him, but the words barely made it to Naruto as he advanced to kill the enemy. He knew the words that lingered on his lips, the words that he was certain Madara was going to use through him. Rijin, the Mangekyo technique that would cause the most excruciating pain imaginable, and he felt repulsed, but before he could get to Haku, he was once more bound to the log in the training grounds. With his own katana now in hand, Sasuke told him, "You're a monster, Naruto," and he knew deep down that you weren't using these abilities to defend anyone. Their purpose is to kill. You will only be able to use the evil powers if you have earned them. You will be the evil monster, not Madara or the Nine Tails, and the evil within you will no longer be what gives you strength. At this point, he almost felt that his death would be well deserved, but that didn't stop the pain, of course, because as Sasuke sliced open his stomach and watched his guts spill out onto the forest floor, he couldn't really think of anything else but the pain he was feeling. Sasuke then thrust the katana into Naruto before he had a chance to defend himself, but he wouldn't have had much to say. "Please, anyone, help me." After an eternity. He had literally watched the sun rise and fall dozens of times, so he knew that if this trial took 3 days, it didn't matter because time was irrelevant in this hell. Hell was the perfect word to describe this place, and since he's been here, he's felt misery, pain, suffering, anguish, sadness, and loneliness. Help never arrived, and for what seemed like eternity, Naruto sat tied to the log while he relived himself killing off his clan, killing villagers, killing his friends, and then being killed in turn. But he's always been alone. He was banished from the orphanage and left to live like a rat on the streets. When he eventually found a family and a clan of his own, they took him away, leaving him alone once more. And now he sat, facing torture and death, knowing that he would die alone. However, for the first time, Naruto was actually starting to experience anger, a new emotion that was emerging from the shadowy corner of his mind. "Are you able to see now?" With his expression as emotionless as ever, Itachi clarified, "This test has no conclusion other than your death. No matter how many times you try, the outcome will always be the same. You have no one to support you at this time, and it is hopeless." Even as the katana slid into Naruto for the millionth time, he was starting to feel angry and exhausted. He was angry at Madara for believing that he was prepared for this in the first place, at Itachi and all of his friends for killing him so many times, at himself for not being able to escape, and at his friends for not coming to his aid. If this was his mind, why couldn't he control it? Why couldn't he fight back? The only thing left in him was his hatred. More than the pain, more than the sadness, more than the loneliness, Naruto was starting to feel a dark sense of hatred seeping up from his very core and into his mind. He had no chakra left, and even though he was tied to a log, he knew that he didn't even have the strength in his arms and legs to stand up, but in the end, there was nothing to fight back against. This was all in his mind, and this was his reality. Pulling the katana from his stomach, Itachi reprimanded Naruto, saying, "You have no one to hate but yourself. You can put an end to this in a heartbeat. Simply turn off the..." Enough, Itachi. He had finally found something that could overcome the pain, and after spending the innumerable days in this desolate place feeling nothing but despair, the hatred inside of him was a welcome feeling, like a desert oasis, and he wanted to cling to it for dear life above all else. Naruto felt the hatred explode inside him as Itachi stabbed him again, this time right in his chest, and the blood that splattered over the blade was tinged with black, and he couldn't help but smile at the reassurance it brought him. The pain in the visions may be fictitious, but his hatred is real. When he entered the Uchiha compound in his visions, controlled by Madara, he would reach deep within himself and his chakra to unleash Amaterasu throughout the entire compound. The power and hatred he felt then through Madara was the same hatred that was pumping out of his dying heart right now. Looking down at the black and red mixture of his blood reminded him of a truth he had known since he had been here, but had actively tried to ignore and forget. He felt his anger steadily increasing as he reached inside himself and let loose his fury on Itachi, the man who had killed him innumerable times with this very katana. The blood gushing from his chest grew darker and darker until it was nearly completely black. Itachi swiftly withdrew the blade and sliced it cleanly through Naruto's neck, as if he sensed something different inside him. Naruto relished the brief moment of freedom as his head flew off his body, but it was over in an instant, and he was once more tied to log. Even though the scene, Itachi, and his wounds had all been reset, he could still feel the dark power pulsing through him. If only he could figure out how to link that to his chakra. He was about to be killed again when Itachi approached him and drew his katana, asking, "Are you ready to die?" "No more meaningless visions," the murderer asked, as though Naruto's response would influence his course of action. "I will repeatedly murder you until you extinguish yourself." He felt a new sense of power come from his hatred, and even if he risked killing himself by using up all of his chakra, he would rather end his life than sit here and be tortured for eternity anyhow. Naruto finally made the connection inside of him at that moment, the flow of chakra to his brain intersecting with the hatred in his heart. If the end was not in sight, he would end it himself. And his desire to see Itachi and everyone else suffer was intense. "Itachi, I want you to die," Naruto said icily, drawing all of the evil energy from his heart and shoving it into his eyes. His world, his mind, his agony was over, all his strength was concentrated in his words, in his command. He gazed down at Itachi with such hatred that the murderer's katana froze in the middle of its swing. His eyes and head burned, his heart felt like it would burst again, but he persisted in forcing his will into Itachi. "You will perish." Naruto's iron will took over. This was his world, after all, and he willed Itachi to turn the blade around against his own chest with all of his hatred and strength. Itachi then used a last push of chakra to drive the blade into his own heart before toppling over to the side. He was so ecstatic to see his tormentor finally dead in front of him that he was able to break free from the ropes that held him to the log and laugh uncontrollably. He was so happy that he actually felt tears of joy streaming down his face, but when he reached up to wipe them away, he was shocked to discover that they were actually blood, possibly because he had already shed so much tears that his own blood was all that remained for him to cry. He turned to see all of his so-called friends, the entire Uchiha clan, and countless Leaf villagers gathered around him, their eyes filled with hatred. "You're a demon." With her Byakugan activated and a kunai in her hand, Hinata yelled at him, "I thought I loved you, but you're nothing but evil. The Uchiha was killed by you." Then, with his own Sharingan triggered and hands flying through seals, Sasuke yelled, "I thought you were my friend." He was a demon, and he killed the Uchiha, but he wasn't going to die here against the log like a helpless fool. He was going to escape, and when all hope, love, and friendship had failed him, it was his hatred that had saved him. Their hatred was weak in comparison to his, and although the darkness inside him had subsided a little since he had ordered Itachi's death, he reached down into it once more to rekindle the flames. When he looked up at the red sky above him, he realized that he had the ability to burn everything to the ground. He only needed to reach inside and release his hatred through his eyes to make everything burn. Even as Hinata charged forward and thrust her kunai toward his heart, Naruto found that he finally saw this world with true clarity for the first time. Naruto took a final moment to look forward at his friends, family, and neighbors to see if he had the will to actually kill them. He expected to feel a moment of hesitation or remorse, but found nothing of the sort. He had no village, no clan, and no friends. Reaching deep inside to pull from his hatred, he attempted to replicate the same chakra pattern that he had felt Madara use through him before. He grabbed her wrist before the kunai could pierce him, and as he looked at her, he saw a reflection of himself in her pearly eyes. Instead of the 3 tomo that had once been in each of his eyes, a strange spiral pattern of black and red seemed to have replaced them. He was a monster, indeed. It would all burn. Amaterasu. With finality, he yelled, his eyes fixed on his best friend. As he willed it, Hinata burst into black flames, and his iron will and hatred became a fiery reality. This was all a lie, but his iron will and hatred were real. He then turned his gaze to everyone else and used the same dark power, instantly engulfing the hundreds of people around him in black fire. The world, the sky, the trees, the grass, this illusion would burn. He didn't stop there. The woods. After blinking and opening his eyes, Naruto discovered that he was sitting in the same forest clearing where he had begun the trial all those days ago. He looked up and was overcome with relief to see that the sky was blue once more and that the clouds in it were as white as ever. The sun's rays that peeked through the canopy warmed his body, and naturally, when he raised an arm to wipe away the tears from his aching eyes, he discovered that they were blood red. Perhaps that had been the whole point all along, because he had passed the trial, or rather, he had surpassed it by using his eyes to will through the illusions that plagued him, and he could tell that he was looking through a new set of eyes now, with the same powerful hatred from before pulsing to his eyes from his very soul. He was no longer in an illusion, but he knew that he could bend this world to his will and burn anything he laid his eyes on, just as he had done with Itachi. At last, Naruto cut the flow of spiritual chakra to his eyes, confident that he had seen through and destroyed the illusion. He could wait to reach out to Madara, but surprisingly, the overwhelming feeling of anger and hatred seemed to extinguish itself with his chakra, leaving him feeling completely empty. He reached into his pouch with a trembling hand and took out a food pill, which he swallowed with a gulp of water, and was relieved that he wouldn't die of starvation. His final thought before he passed out was a bitter realization. He had vowed never to kill Sasuke or Hinata to obtain the Mangekyo Sharingan, but in the end, that's exactly what he had been willing to do. He knew why he had been able to use Amaterasu, an evil power, and whether it was an illusion or not, he would have been willing to kill anyone to get out of that prison. The morning after, Naruto squinted in frustration as the early morning sun's rays pierced the forest canopy and fell on his face, waking him from his deep slumber. He let out a groan and spat out a small piece of grass that had gotten into his mouth before pausing to look around and assess the situation. When he realized exactly why he was here and what he had achieved, his eyes widened. He whispered to himself, "I did it," and reached up to touch his face close to his eyes, as though that would make them feel different. As Madara had predicted, he had been able to use both Kotoamatsukami and Amaterasu after unlocking the Mangekyo Sharingan. As a ninja, these techniques alone elevated him to a whole new level. When he figured out how to use them regularly, anyway, he didn't even need Madara to warn him that it wouldn't be wise for anyone else in the village to be aware of his new abilities just yet. If they did, the council might lose their mind and deprive him of his genin rank. He was probably now among the most valuable ninja in the Leaf Village, if not the entire ninja community. At least if he could learn to use his powers. It was probably wise to speak with Madara now and find out more about his powers, but the idea of using his spiritual chakra to activate his Sharingan and establish a connection with the Patriarch of Uchiha made him feel sick to his stomach. If only for a day, Madara could wait. Now he wanted to get home, take a shower, and stuff himself with as much ramen as his stomach would allow. He walked back to the village gate for a couple of hours. He could have accelerated his pace by running through the trees, but he preferred to save energy and, to be honest, he simply relished the peaceful stroll by himself. I felt conflicted as I gazed up at the wall enclosing the village. Although he was overjoyed to be back and hear the bustling sounds of other people, he also felt as though he was cut off from everyone else. He had just experienced something that no one in this room could possibly comprehend. And when it came time to defend the leaf from Orochimaru, he had done it all for them. Would they value what he gave up? Were they able to? Since the gate was heavily guarded due to the large number of foreign visitors for the Chunin exams, it took an additional 30 minutes to enter. He still had to wait in a short line to obtain his ID, even though there was a separate line for Konoha residents, and his chakra was examined before he was allowed to pass. He nearly started crying when he saw his apartment building as he approached it. Sincerely, he had believed that he would never be able to get out of that trial. He had anticipated dying in that mental prison. However, he had arrived at last. As he approached his door, he extracted a secret key by reaching up to a nearby lamp. He applied it to his front door and entered to the comforting scent of his home. He exclaimed with a sigh of joy, "I'm home, to no one." After removing his sandals, he proceeded to his bedroom, removed his soiled shirt, and tossed it deftly into the laundry basket. When he entered the bedroom, he instantly froze. He wasn't by himself. His bed was occupied by someone. What on earth? Was this a different delusion? What had someone been in his? By chance, the intruder turned over on their back and let him know who they were. Senju Hinata. His weary mind was filled with a flurry of questions. Was she discharged from the medical facility? In fact, how long had he been gone? For what reason was she in his bed and why was she in his house? The last thing he had done to get rid of the visions in the forest, burning Hinata alive with Amaterasu, came back to him. Now that he was staring down at her sleeping form, the guilt that threatened to overwhelm him was overwhelming. His inescapable guilt was swiftly repelled by an internal force. He had been deceived by her. She had killed him and made fun of him a lot. Again and again. Why did having to do what he had to do make him feel so horrible? A wave of pain exploded through his skull, forcing him to close his eyes. He tried to think about it, and it literally hurt. He removed his shorts and threw them aside, picked up a pair of underwear, and walked stealthily to his shower, shaking his head in silent surprise. To be honest, he just wanted to eat and clean himself before dealing with anything or anyone else, even though one shouldn't have to sneak around in their own home. As soon as the warm water hit his back and began to remove all of the sweat and dirt from him, he let out an inevitable groan of satisfaction. Being clean was a wonderful feeling. He saw that a startling amount of dark red and brown blood washed off his face when he washed it. Then, that part was also real. He would need to ask Madara if this would be the first time he used the Mangekyo or if it would be the first time his eyes bled. He noticed how strange he appeared to himself when he first stopped in front of the mirror after getting out of the shower. His eyes appeared even darker than before, despite the fact that he appeared slightly thinner and undernourished. His eyes had been a cheerful, bright blue since he was a child. Itachi's eyes had somehow blended with his brother's and become a slightly darker shade of blue after he switched them with Shisui's. His eyes were so dark blue now that at first he thought they were black. Strange. He didn't give a damn, but somehow he assumed Hinata would get worked up over something as insignificant as this. Now that he was looking at himself, he briefly considered trying to see what the Mangekyo Sharingan would look like if he could turn it on with a command. In his visions, he recalled that the Tomo had vanished, leaving behind an odd, hazy black spiral design to replace it. He shook his head. The mere thought of activating the Sharingan alone made him sick, and he wasn't even sure if he had enough chakra already. He was extremely grateful that he had remembered to put on his underwear when he entered his room because he had momentarily forgotten that there was another person in his home. When he looked directly at Hinata, who was now sitting on her knees on top of his bed, he momentarily froze. He assumed she hadn't really planned to sleep in his bed because she was dressed normally and her dark hair was pulled back into an untidy ponytail. Between them, dozens of emotions flowed. Within the space of a second or two, he saw anger, hurt, worry, and happiness in her eyes. He had assumed that seeing her would make him happy, but then he suddenly recalled the sensation of her sinking a katana into his chest or slitting his throat with a kunai. Or when she did nothing but watch as Sasuke set his body on fire. The unfamiliar sensation of pure hatred suddenly flared up inside his heart. It had been a vision. He shook his head and smothered the smoldering flames. That hadn't been true. None of those things had ever been done to him by the real Hinata. However, Naruto-kun, she yelled, breaking the hush and jolting him out of his reverie. You're. She stopped strangely, and he saw that her eyes were darting all over him and that she was blushing slightly. Once more he shook his head. "Oh, excuse me," he said softly as he made his way to his closet. With haste, he began putting on a pair of shorts and a Uchiha t-shirt. I wasn't expecting visitors. He could see her flinch out of the corner of her eyes, and his tone had come out much harsher than he had intended. He noticed that any anger in her eyes had vanished and had been replaced by guilt when he turned to face her again, fully clothed now. She hurriedly defended herself by saying, "I'm sorry, Naruto-kun. I know I shouldn't be here right now, but..." Once more, she paused and gazed at him with a peculiar mixture of hesitation and fear, as though he were giving her a death glare. He had predicted that she would notice the change in the color of his eyes. He merely arched an eyebrow and bided his time until she went on. She swallowed first, nervously. She began, "When I got out of the hospital last week," but Naruto swore to himself. "Last week? Whoa, how long has it been? I came over to see why you hadn't visited me. But you were gone, and I kept stopping by a few times every day and you still didn't answer the door. Sasuke said that he had no idea where you were, but he lent me a spare key to your house for me to check, just in case you had passed out or something inside. Oh, Sasuke. It makes sense that instead of checking himself, he would let her in. She paused once more, trying to relax by inhaling deeply. She looked up at him, her big pearly eyes actually welling with tears. "I was so worried that something had happened to you, but no one in the chain of command seemed concerned, and I thought that if I stayed here at night I'd be able to find you first. Naruto-kun, are you okay? What happened? You look beat up, somehow. Are you really mad at me?" He tried his hardest to suppress all the bad feelings she didn't deserve. He attempted to say, "My home is your home, Hinata-chan," with his most comforting smile, but it was forced and unnatural. "I forgive you. It's my fault for not telling you what I was doing beforehand. So I'm sorry too. I can tell you about everything, but first, I really want to eat something." And when he saw something strange about his room, he stopped. Somehow, it seemed different. Aside from the fact that a girl was on his bed, something was definitely strange. When he realized that his room was clean, his eyes widened. It had never been this clean. His tools were all neatly arranged against the wall, and there were no clothes on the floor. Without showing any gratitude, he asked incredulously, "Hinata, did you clean my room?" Although the floor appeared to have been vacuumed and the clothes were folded, he didn't mind at all, but "I figured if I was going to stay here for a little bit while I waited for you to return, I could make up for it by cleaning around the house." And his eyes instantly shot to the area beneath his bed, where he concealed a number of magazines that he didn't want anyone else to find, and he stopped listening to her. To be clear, Kiba had given him porn magazines as a joke and get-well gift back in the day. For instance, magazines he definitely didn't want Hinata to discover while she was tidying his room. Her face turned completely red, as if she had followed his gaze. I don't want to lie to you, Naruto-kun," she stumbled softly, looking him in the eye. "I pulled everything out in order to vacuum underneath the bed, and as soon as I saw them I couldn't help but look. Straight from one hell to another. Oh no, Hinata." Inside his chest, the black embers of resentment flared again. In any case, why was it important? Later on, he and Sasuke could laugh about this together because Hinata was his best friend. Why, then, was he becoming so upset? He spat out the words, "Let me know next time you plan on breaking into my house and sleeping in my bed," as they tasted bad. "I'll clean the place up better next time and hide anything that I don't want you to find." He was unaware of the exact moment, but he must have unconsciously activated the Sharingan at some point. He felt a direct connection to the same powerful essence of wrath that appeared to be rooted inside his spiritual chakra, despite the initial wave of nausea that came with using chakra again. The Mangekyo Sharingan had to be the one. He had a sinister thought. Could he make Hinata forget about this whole situation and just leave him alone if he so desired? Could he make her forget by forcing his will and chakra into his eyes? He allowed his inner strength to blend with his chakra and flow into his eyes. He would learn to control and manipulate the overwhelming hatred inside of him. If he had to, he would bend the world to his will and set fire to anything that. A familiar voice, much clearer than usual, yelled, "Naruto." Inside his head, "The Mangekyo Sharingan is not a toy. Do not use it until I've told you more about it. Do you want to kill her? Had you even?" The voice was interrupted by Naruto, who instantly stopped the nauseating chakra flow while fighting the urge to throw up. To put it mildly, it can be nauseating for weeks to try to force yourself to use chakra after you've almost run out, especially after 3 days of subsisting solely on food pills. In fact, he had no idea what he was thinking. Madara was correct. Hinata-chan shouldn't be the first person he used the Mangekyu on, he needed to learn more about it first. He murmured to her, "I need to go get something to eat," while massaging his sore eyes. "Forget about everything here, I don't care. Let's just go in." When he finally turned to face her and saw the sheer terror in her eyes, he trailed off. She appeared to be choking on her words as her mouth hung open. She finally stammered out, "En Naruto-kun," pointing to his face as though he was wearing something. "Your eyes, your Sharingan just shifted into something terrifying. What was that?" With a sigh, he approached the bed. Gently, he took her arm and dragged her away from his bed and toward the door. He led Hinata out with a firm, "Let's go, Hinata," a burning headache already starting to pound in his brain. "I'll explain everything over some food." Sasuke Uchiha brought his right arm down to his side after landing on the lightning seal after flying through the hand signs with practiced fluidity. He heard the first crackling of electricity form as he pushed his newly formed flow of chakra down to his palm while holding onto his arm with his free hand. Kakashi's trademark lightning technique is called Chidori. Too simple. The difficult part started at this point. He injected chakra into his legs and leapt forward at a high speed in the direction of his stationary target, a rock clone. Before he could go more than a few paces, a wall of crystal exploded out of the earth before him. Grinning, he lifted his arms and cut straight through it, sending the crystal crashing into 1,000 fragments. Previously, Guren's crystals had simply reflected all of his fire attacks. However, he now possessed something that even she found difficult to resist. Even though they had been dulled for training purposes, a number of other crystals leapt out of the ground to impale him, but he managed to use the chakra to jump and avoid them all. As he got closer, more crystals seemed to encircle the rock dummy in a final defensive move. As before, he pumped more chakra into his arms and charged straight through, ultimately exploding the earth clone as his arm broke through the crystal. With a sigh, he released his chakra, and although the broken crystals and rock continued to fall all around him, the chirping sound of electricity subsided. Kakashi had examined Sasuke's chakra for the possibility of a second affinity after he had expressed his worry to him that his fire attacks wouldn't be effective enough against some of his opponents. His chakra had a connection to lightning and fire, which delighted Sasuke. Thus, Sasuke had been studying a single high-ranked attack known as Chidori in addition to several basic but powerful lightning-style ninjutsu. His innate talent and affinity for lightning had made it easy for him to pick up the basic skills. To Kakashi's dismay, however, Sasuke had also mastered the use of Chidori, possibly even more so than Kakashi. Kakashi could only sustain the potent technique when running in a straight line, even though his masked sensei had more chakra than he did and could use Chidori more frequently than Sasuke. The prodigy from Uchiha had recently discovered how to maintain the electricity while sprinting, leaping, and changing course. Guren, who had been cultivating the crystals to thwart him from a distance, landed beside him. "You've gotten so much better with it," she said, expressing his enthusiasm for the new method. "I would have had a much harder time with you in the prelims if you could use any of these new techniques." "Thanks, Guren," he said modestly, in spite of his intense desire to boast about his achievements. "You've really helped me get to this point. You think I'll be able to get past Kimimara's bone armor with something like this?" Even though she had been excited before, the mention of her Akatsuki boss instantly made her face sour. "You need to take me seriously," she said sternly, her voice low and quiet. "You shouldn't fight Kimimaro. I thought you said you ran into him during your mission in the Land of Waves or something. You should know that he's far above our level." He smiled his most charming smile at her, reverting to his most at ease and self-assured demeanor. "Listen, Guren, I'm glad you're worried about me. I think it's sweet. But I was holding back during my fight against you. I never like hurting pretty girls. Kimimaro won't be as lucky as you were." She put her hands on her hips in annoyance, but she couldn't resist smiling back at him. "Oh, were you now?" she asked in jest, but she couldn't help smiling. "I'm being serious though. You saw what happened with Rock Lee. The harder you push Kimimaro, the harder for him it will be to hold back. There's no way you can win. Winning isn't everything." He ultimately shrugged off the question. "You heard the Hokage. All we have to do is show that I am as competent as a Chunin and I can get that promotion even if I lose. It's not worth dying over," she shot back, determined to make him give up. "Don't be an idiot. Listen to me. Utakata is seated to fight against Kimimaro first. Despite hating his guts, I'll admit that he's a little stronger than I am. And he's not even training this month because he plans on forfeiting. His determination was equally uncompromising. "I don't care what your teammate does. You're just salty that you lost against me, and if I ended up winning the whole thing it'd make you feel even weaker compared to me." She shook her head vigorously. "That's ridiculous. I just don't want to lose you." Her abrupt and confidently unintentional honesty made him smile. He always smiled when he caught her saying something like that, which usually resulted in her blushing and turning her face away in embarrassment. He winked at her, but before he could say anything slick, Kakashi landed beside them both, shutting the book he was always reading when he had free time. "Yo," he waved in their direction. "Sasuke, you've made excellent progress with my technique. You've been able to use it far faster than I ever could, which is saying something since I'd like to consider myself pretty good at learning new techniques. I think we should call it quits for today before you burn up too much chakra. Remember what I warned you, if you try and force out this technique, or any high-level ninjutsu for that matter, and you run out of chakra, you risk passing out or even death. You have to learn your limits." He looked at the blue-haired Akatsuki with his lone eye. "Gurren, as usual, thanks for helping us out. I'm not sure what Sasuke did to convince you to come help him train, but you've been a great help. I hope you've learned a thing or two as well. Your precision and abilities continually amaze me." His kind words caused her to flush, and she bowed her head in respect and gratitude. Sasuke nodded his own approval at her. She claimed that she was actually a big shot in Akatsuki. Although she claimed to be the weakest person in that role, he was aware of her strong desire to become stronger and better herself, even though he wasn't entirely sure what her title was. Sasuke couldn't help but worry about his best friend Naruto as they made their way back to Konoha that afternoon. Hinata claimed that the blonde fool had vanished during the past week. Sasuke was aware that nothing negative had truly happened to him, but she was rapidly assuming the worst. The Hokage would have shut down everything to try to find a missing Jinchuriki at a time like this, when other villages were invited to the Leaf. Kakashi assumed that everything was fine because he hadn't heard anything concerning from the Hokage. Nevertheless, he was aware that Naruto shared his desire to win the entire tournament. What was that guy doing, then? Naruto. As he pulled back the curtains to Ichiraku's, Naruto couldn't help but groan when he saw the enormous white hair of his would-be sensei. For many ninjas, the highlight of their week would be running into the legendary toad sage Jiraiya at the ramen stand. Even worse, Jiraiya had apparently been anticipating them because Naruto saw 2 brand new bowls of steaming ramen on the placemats beside him. Was he a cunning and strategic ninja or a worthless pervert? He made it difficult to tell at times. Naruto-chan, Hinata-chan. Jiraiya turned and waved them over, shouting joyfully. "Come on, take a seat. Your meals just got here less than a minute ago. Eat it while it's still hot. My treat." Despite Hinata's shocked and perplexed look, he simply rolled his eyes and followed her inside. Even if he had to share it with his well-known and useless mentor, a free meal was still a free meal. Naruto exclaimed with frantic zeal, "Itadakimasu." He couldn't recall the last time he had felt so ravenous. He intended to shove down quite a few more bowls after this one, and he would make that old man regret offering to buy him food. Jiraiya gave him a back pat while laughing. He urged the reserved Senju, who had been a little less eager to eat than Naruto, "That's the spirit. Don't be shy, Hinata-chan, dig in." It's likely that she was initially anxious about being in the presence of a well-known ninja like Jiraiya. Pretending not to be impressed or upset, Naruto finally asked the toad sage, "So how do you know we were coming?" In between mouthfuls, what gave it away? His rhetorical question, "Naruto, my boy, I wouldn't be the world's greatest spy if I lost track of where my little pupil went off to when I'm responsible for him, now would I?" actually caused Naruto to consider a number of issues. Jiraiya was responsible for him in what way? Instead, he sneered at him. "I don't think the world's greatest spy would announce that he's a spy at all," Naruto thought as he consumed yet another substantial and delectable bite. "I'm not sure that's how spying works." Jiraiya also chuckled. "I can tell you whatever I want, and you still won't be able to tell when I'm tracking you, kiddo. That's how good of a spy I am. But I digress. I'm sure Hinata has been really worried about why you've been playing around in the woods for a week." Despite flinching, Naruto persisted in eating. To what extent was Jiraiya aware? He didn't want to tell Jiraiya about everything that had happened to him lately, so his original plan was to tell Hinata. The Sannin didn't seem to like Naruto hearing anything Madara had to say, and he didn't want to get into that argument right now. Instead, he made an effort to change the subject. Perhaps when Jiraiya finds out that he and Hinata took his book, they will stop talking about his forest adventure. Naruto smiled and leaned back, saying, "You know, you might be a lousy spy, but you're actually a decent author," while Jiraiya bit into his own food. "Hinata and I have been reading through Makeout Paradise together, and we're loving it so far." Naruto didn't intend for the redirection to be so colorful. In fact, the fabled toad sage began coughing hysterically after choking on his mouthful of ramen. Had it been an unfortunate bite, or was he simply extremely sensitive to praise? The old pervert finally laughed after an uncomfortable minute of recuperation. "I think I misheard you," he said. "What book of mine have you been reading again?" Leaning forward with a cheek full of pork, Hinata made the decision to finally speak up. "Makeout Paradise," she explained to Naruto, swallowing while wearing a tiny, sly smile. "I managed to swipe it out of your bag when you visited us in the hospital. I promise I'll give it back, Lord Jiraiya, but so far Naruto and I have read about halfway through together." Jiraiya glanced back and forth at them as if they were insane or as if he thought they would start laughing. He appeared even more worried when they didn't. His little laugh was not nearly as sincere as the previous one, but he still said, "You're kidding, right? Please tell me that you guys actually didn't take the uncensored copy of Makeout Paradise that I lost." "Some ninja you are," Naruto muttered, grinning. "Hinata-chan was literally blinded when she swiped that from you." The Sannin's expression grew increasingly appalled. As they both kept eating, he yelled, "That's the version I published before I had to edit it for the movie script. Why, you're not even old enough to buy that in stores. And you read it together. Holy hell, I know ninjas who hide that book from their spouses." Together, Naruto and Hinata exchanged a perplexed glance before shrugging. Given how strongly Jiraiya opposed them reading the book, his motivation to finish it had just increased. So far, the story had been funny and well-paced, and it hadn't been overly explicit. After a while, Jiraiya shook his head in awe and briefly resumed eating his own food. "You guys are something else. Just don't tell anybody you got that book from me. And you better give it back. They don't sell that version in stores anymore, and there's a few high-profile people around town who are willing to pay me a high price for the original version. It even has illustrations in it." Naruto furrowed his brow. He stated bluntly, "The illustrations suck," and then hurriedly added, "Respectfully, sir." Jiraiya loudly replied, "Now listen here, you little shit," and gave him an unjustified slap across the head. "My illustrations are a work of art. Pure genius, if you ask me. And they aren't meant to be seen by little kiddos anyway." Naruto felt that now familiar feeling of dark hatred come alive inside of him after being scolded and hit. Whether he was kidding or not, he turned to face Jiraiya, his eyes icy. "We're not kids anymore, Lord Jiraiya. We're ninja. I've already killed for this village. And you don't know what I've been through." Jiraiya's eyes narrowed at him, and after a brief period of silent tension, he rubbed Naruto's head with his big hands and laughed loudly as usual. You're right. So tell me, Naruto, just what exactly were you doing in the woods for a week? Were you finally able to pop that ball I gave you?" He caught a glimpse of Hinata leaning forward to listen to him out of the corner of his eye. Naruto responded with a sigh, "I popped your stupid ball about a minute after you gave it to me. Respectfully, Lord Jiraiya, I think your training is a waste of time. I've been working on my own techniques." Naruto's comments didn't seem to offend the Sannin in the least. "Oh, and what have you been working on then?" Naruto was tempted to use his new abilities right then and there, reaching down into the well of spiritual chakra and hatred. The idea of making Jiraiya follow his instructions amused him, even though he wasn't entirely sure how they operated yet. He reluctantly chose to put his trust in Madara. It didn't seem wise to use the Mangekyo before he was completely aware of the dangers. Saying, "None of your business, sir," Naruto slammed his bowl onto the counter and motioned for Ayame to bring him another. "You're not my sensei. I'm working by myself from now on." To Naruto's surprise, Jiraiya abruptly retorted, "Perhaps not now, but I will be your sensei after these exams are over." What? Why would his sensei be Jiraiya? What about Kakashi and Team 7? Jiraiya paused to enjoy Naruto's blatant bewilderment. You may not have noticed, but the higher-ups in the Konoha are freaking out like they haven't in a long time. Orochimaru has been spotted in the village, our gates are open to other nations, and worst of all, the Amekkage and Akatsuki will be attending the finals in about a week. I'll spill the beans, Naruto boy, since you weren't quite sharp enough to figure it out for yourself. The Hokage has assigned me to look after you during this period before the Chunin exams. Orochimaru's desire to demolish the Leaf Village is evident to me. I am uncertain as to whether Akatsuki will be helping him. We have not received any communication from the Amekage, and I am aware that he is aware of Orochimaru's antics. Another intriguing tidbit of information is that Utakata, a Jinchuriki who was once a member of the Hidden Mist, is also present. We were unaware that he was employed in Akatsuki, but it appears that the Amekage sent his own tailed beast to the Chunin exams. And then there's you, Naruto. The old Hokage might be a genius, but I think he dropped the ball when it came to your training. I think he had a soft spot for you since you're the fourth's kid, but in the end, you are a weapon for the Leaf Village. You are a Jinchuriki. You need to learn how to use that power so when crappy situations like this happen, we can see you as an asset and not a liability. The Leaf Village and I can't fend off Orochimaru, the Amekage, and a tailed beast all at once, which is currently the worst case scenario that can happen. We need another card in our hands to play. We need you to be able to control the power of the Nine Tails, which is why I've been assigned to train you immediately following these accursed exams. It was a lot of nonsense to absorb all at once. With a steady hand, Naruto attempted to eat his new bowl of ramen, but he could see that Jiraiya and Hinata were both observing him closely. Being an honorable ninja for the Leaf Village and serving with his friends had been his greatest life goal. However, when he found out from Madara that the Leaf had given Itachi the order to murder the Uchiha clan, that dream came to an end. The fact that the Leaf Village had always viewed him as a demon and not at all as a useful asset was perhaps the icing on the cake. He started to harbor the embers of his old hatred. In all of this, where was the fairness? He was abandoned on the streets after growing up as an orphan. Even though he was the son of the Hokage who saved everyone, he was treated with disdain and contempt by the villagers. Since he had dedicated his entire life to becoming a ninja, the Leaf Village had killed off his clan in retaliation. They wanted to train him now. Did Jiraiya belong to that group? Was Jiraiya among the council members who would gladly kill the Uchiha clan in order to protect the Leaf? Naruto made the decision to determine whether he could trust the Sannin at this very moment. Naruto finally said, "Lord Jiraiya," in a composed manner. "This may sound random, but since you claim to be the world's greatest spy, do you know why Itachi murdered the Uchiha clan?" Though he didn't have time to focus on Hinata right now, Naruto was aware that she was most likely very confused. His entire attention was on Jiraiya. Before he recovered, the Sannin's eyes widened rapidly, and they briefly clashed. Before he answered, he could see that Jiraiya was quickly attempting to determine Naruto's level of knowledge. "Naruto," Jiraiya said slowly as he glanced back and forth between Hinata and himself. "That's not really something I'd like to casually talk about during an enjoyable lunch." Naruto had an unwavering will. "I'm not going to train underneath a man who isn't honest with me, or a man who doesn't actually know what's going on around this village." Jiraiya was equally witty. "You're a genin, sworn under oath to serve the Hokage and follow the orders of your superiors. You'll do as you're told." Naruto spat back, his rage threatening to explode. "Or what?" he asked. "If I'm such a valuable asset, what are you going to do to me? Throw me out on the streets?" "Already done that. Threaten my family. They're already dead." Jiraiya gruffly replied, "The penalty for insubordination can be prison time," his friendly manner gone. "In your case, a refusal to defend your village can mean treason and death." His growing sense of annoyance made him laugh, and he couldn't help it. "Perhaps if you and the Leaf are so eager to imprison or kill me, I'd be better off running away and siding with Akatsuki. I hear the Amekage has open arms for ninja who are fed up with the corruption in their stupid villages." Naruto. Interestingly, Hinata interrupted, making him stop his stare down with Jiraiya and turn to face her. "Listen to yourself. You're not acting normal. What happened to your promise of never leaving the village?" He wanted to throw a lot of things at them both, but it took a lot of work to control his sharp tongue and bite off the quantity. It was correct, Hinata-chan. It was their dream to rise through the ninja ranks here and go on missions as a team, and he had repeatedly assured her that he would not be leaving the Leaf Village. Since he had last made that pledge, a lot had transpired. That dream was becoming less and less appealing because so much had changed. Naruto used to say, "I'm sorry, Hinata," getting up from his seat. "I wanted to have a private conversation with you. Meet up with me later and we can talk about everything. I'm taking my leave now." Naruto turned and hurriedly leapt away from the ramen stand without even turning to face his superior. He was growing increasingly irritated with Jiraiya for some reason. Weeks ago, He would have jumped up and down with excitement at the prospect of training under such a legendary ninja, but now he felt childish for not being able to better control his emotions. However, he was gradually realizing that in this flawed world, expectations and reality did not match. He had to get his thoughts straight. He decided it was time to go talk to Madara, even though he had intended to take it easy today and deal with the problems tomorrow. The compound of Uchiha. With a terrible mix of dread and nostalgia, Naruto stood in front of the Uchiha compound's entrance. He'd stood here next to Itachi countless times in his visions before he was made to alive, the killing of the entire clan. In those visions, anything could have happened. It might have been a secret truth that had been buried deep within him, or it might have just been his mind playing tricks on him. He had to know for certain whether Madara and Itachi had killed the Uchiha together using his body. He wanted to explore the compound and get a sense of things on his own, even though he could just activate his Sharingan and ask Madara right now. After taking a deep breath to help him relax, he walked purposefully down the walkway and into the compound entrance. At the first intersection, he turned right. According to his vision, he used a giant skeletal arm, apparently a power Madara possessed but had never even mentioned to Naruto, to smash the well-known restaurant down this road. He crushed it, and sure enough, it looked exactly like he had imagined it would when he got to the restaurant. He turned to see that when he had swung his skeletal arm sideways, the sides of the surrounding homes and businesses had been crushed. Everything was falling into place. He was about to continue walking when an idea suddenly occurred to him. He hurriedly tried to absorb every detail as he turned to face the restaurant he had allegedly destroyed. Though it didn't make sense, it appeared to be exactly like what he had seen in his visions. The Anbu or medical team would have arrived here to clear away all the debris and remove the bodies, wouldn't they? Why would it have the same appearance? He became even more perplexed as he continued to stroll around the compound. Everything appeared exactly as his vision had depicted. Other than being burned or crushed, houses were unaffected. After the medical teams arrived, he and Sasuke had ordered everyone out of the compound. So why did the destroyed buildings seem to be in perfect condition when the teams would have needed to dismantle everything to find bodies? He gave a headshake. The possibility that his vision had been real and that he had unwittingly participated in the massacre was far more important than that. He had visited locations in his vision that he had never been to in real life, and it suddenly occurred to him that there was a way for him to witness this truth for himself. Other than the terrible fact that Madara had taken over his body and visited the compound that fateful night, he would be unable to explain how he knew what those locations looked like if they were indeed the same as what he saw during his trial. At last, he found himself in front of the home of a random villager he had killed hundreds of times in his imagination. He had witnessed a woman flee into this house after he destroyed the first wave of Uchiha first responders. In order to swiftly pursue the woman, Naruto had approached it and used his eyes to burn down the door. In the visions, Naruto had indeed entered through a huge hole in the front of this house. This was the ideal location. Although Naruto had been friendly with all the Uchiha, he still didn't really know them all or go to their homes, so he had no idea who this woman had actually been. However, he knew the layout like the back of his hand when he entered. Indeed, upon approaching the bedroom, he discovered a dark hole in the floor and that half of the bed was gone. The woman in his vision and the bed had been burned away. He recalled giggling each time, describing how pathetic it was for Uchiha to hide under a bed and cower in death. He had never been in this house before or after the massacre. And yet here it was, just as his vision had described. He hurried out of the house right away and made his way to the Uchiha's gathering spot. He picked up the particular floor mat, pushed in the seal, and unlocked the underground hallway's hidden passageway. He activated his Sharingan, making sure his chakra touched the appropriate seals before moving down the corridor and into the inner sanctum. Neither of them had yet to speak, but he could feel Madara's presence touching his own. At last, he found himself standing in front of the enormous stone that held the secrets of the Sharingan. He took a seat and tried his hardest to keep the sheer horror and fury from overwhelming him. He inhaled deeply, closed his eyes, and concentrated on his subconscious and the presence of his prisoners inside of him. He knew that if he tried, he could get inside because he had been there before. He found it much easier than he had anticipated to follow the spiritual chakra's path from Madara back to its origin. He awoke to find himself standing in the well-known sewers of the imprisoned prison inside of him. He knew that Madara Uchiha and the Nine Tails were the two strong chakra sources, and he found it very easy to walk there from here. At last, he stood far away from the massive bars that held the Nine Tails captive. Madara stood between the demon and him. The sight of the person who had killed his family with his body stoked the hatred within. He felt his Sharingan change to demonstrate to him that everything in this world was something he could control, and all of the strong chakra he had previously sensed rushed to his eyes. He pushed his own chakra and willpower into the ancient patriarch after locking eyes with Madara's own Mangekyo. Madara, explain yourself. In other places, Gurren had been spending more and more time with him over the past few days, even though she had officially turned down his proposal of dating. In addition to their now daily training sessions with Kakashi in the morning, she would frequently visit his apartment in the afternoon while feigning to discuss Itachi. Usually, they would simply go somewhere and discuss a variety of topics. It could be argued that Gurren was behaving more like his ideal girlfriend than Sakura had ever been for someone who wasn't interested in romance. Things were going well, even though they weren't dating the way he had hoped. If not his girlfriend, Gurren was the epitome of a female friend. Unfortunately, Sasuke would not have liked how quickly the inevitable disaster came to pass. Knock, knock. After training in the late afternoon, Sasuke walked to the door to let Gurren in after eating and taking a shower. She didn't usually arrive this early, but he wasn't at all shocked by the visit given how much time they had been spending together lately. The blue-haired crystal girl really only needed to give in to his ridiculously attractive appearance and be more forthright about her feelings. He was taken aback when a girl with pink hair appeared in front of the open door and asked, "What's up, gee, Sakura? Why in the world was she here? What do you want?" They had split up by the time he last heard from them. She interfered with his training, tried to butt into his life where she wasn't welcome, and was just too much trouble for him. She was cute, all right. However, he needed to be competent and cute. She was dressed as she usually does, in a crimson dress designed for kunoichi to be comfortable enough to wear in combat. She began slowly, Sasuke, gazing up at him with a beseeching expression. "We need to talk. Can I come in, please?" With barely disguised annoyance, he combed his hair. Without even trying to be kind, he said, "Talk about what? We broke up. Sorry if I hadn't made that clear enough. What more do we have to talk about?" Despite his calloused exterior, he felt emotional distress when he saw her near tears at his door. That was something he detested. "I thought he had already moved on." She cried out, "I'm sorry," while clasping her hands together in desperation. "I shouldn't have yelled at you like that. I was just hurt that you didn't seem to want to spend time with me. I acted out in anger and I know I should have done everything differently. But after spending this time away from you, I know that I can't stay mad at you. Please, Sasuke, I really want to work this out." This was a bad idea, and he knew it. He was aware that after inviting her to his house to discuss it, Gurren would arrive a moment later, irrationally furious, and their friendship would be shattered. Was Sakura worth the chance that it would even occur? However, if Gurren was the kind of girl who would be unreasonable in her anger at him for speaking to Sakura, why would he even be friends with her? He had proposed to Gurren. All she had desired was friendship. She had nothing to be unhappy about. Although Naruto may refer to Sasuke as a playboy and he occasionally acts like a jerk, Sasuke was a gentleman. He had no intention of dismissing Sakura and sending her off in tears. He was brave enough to do it to her face, but he was also polite enough to do it right. He didn't want his breakup with a girl to be accompanied by a wave of bad feelings. He invited her in and offered to make her some tea, for better or worse. He was careful to prepare enough for several people. Always prepare for the worst. Knock, knock. His door was knocked on again just as the water was beginning to boil. Sakura gave him a perplexed look from her seat at the dining table as he sighed and moved slowly to the entrance. Hey, perhaps having Gurren here was a better idea. He would have witnesses, much like in a formal trial, so Sakura couldn't claim he hit her or said something completely absurd. For the second time, he caught himself off guard and asked, "What's up, G, Hinata?" This time, his dark brown-haired Senju and teammate was standing at the door, appearing just as emotionally distressed as Sakura had just moments before. "What's wrong?" "It's Naruto-kun," Hinata exclaimed, sounding as though she had just rushed here. "It had to be Naruto-kun. I finally found him this morning, and we were eating lunch together, but then Jiraiya-sama was there, and he said some strange things to Naruto-kun, and Naruto-kun left but told me I could see him later, but he's not back in his room or anywhere in." Sasuke let out another sigh and squeezed the bridge of his nose in an attempt to prevent the headache from coming. He interrupted one of her breaths with, "Slow down, calm down, Hinata. I haven't seen Naruto in weeks." That didn't help his friend with the pale eyes. She exclaimed, "There's something different about him." But Sasuke was clearly unaware of what it was. Something was weird about his eyes, and I wanted to know if you knew anything about the Sharingan that would make his eyes. Instead of droning endlessly at the door, he took her arm and drew her in. In an attempt to avoid adding more drama to his already complex afternoon, he forced a smile and said, "How about we talk about this over some tea?" However, he couldn't simply tell her to worry about it on her own and slam the door in her face. "Take a deep breath. Everything's going to be alright, Hinata. We can figure out what to do about Naruto together." She seemed to be holding back her tears, but she nodded enthusiastically. It's odd that this girl, who was presumably on par with him in strength, was reduced to an emotional mess when it came to Naruto. After removing her shoes, she entered his home and was ready to proceed when she noticed Sakura seated at his table and stopped. He chose to say, "Oh, Sakura's here too," before she could inquire. "We have something to work out that you might be able to help us with." In a matter of minutes, Sasuke was seated at his dining table across from two girls he had not anticipated seeing today. Sakura and Hinata. He sipped the tea slowly and took a moment to collect himself and consider this as logically as possible. When he finally said, "Sakura," he put down his cup and turned to face her with dark eyes. "I think we can deal with your situation first and quickly. Then I can help out with whatever Hinata needs. Let's just be honest about this, Sakura. We gave it a shot, but I don't think we're cut out for each other." Hinata sat up straight after her eyes widened in shock and she realized she was now embroiled in some unanticipated relationship problems. For her part, Sakura turned her attention away from Hinata and fixed him with intense intensity in her green eyes. Disregarding her tea and fumbling with her hands, she retorted vehemently, "No relationship is going to be perfect. There are always going to be fights and issues. But I'm sorry, and I'm willing to change for you, because I really love you, Sasuke." Hinata fought the impulse to roll his eyes as he gasped. "Ladies. What you feel isn't love," he said authoritatively, trying to keep his feelings from coming through in his voice. "You loved me before you even got to know me, just like all of the other girls. I get why you do. I'm attractive, talented, wealthy, and I'm going to be a clan head someday with influence and power. Just about every girl besides Hinata here felt the same way, but I was willing to give you a shot just to experience what it was like to date a girl. That's not love." Sakura persistently shook her head. "It was love, and even after we broke up weeks ago, I knew that I wanted to be with you again. These past few weeks have been terrible. I feel like a part of myself is missing. I think that's love, Sasuke." With a sigh, he turned to face Hinata to ask her for sound advice. She appeared to prefer blending in with her surroundings over assisting him, as evidenced by her tightly pursed lips. She was a teammate. "When you love someone, you'd be willing to die for them," Sasuke, facing Sakura, finally uttered. "Love isn't a joke. Do you really think you'd be willing to give up your life for me? Would you be willing to die in my place?" Now he was a little too emotional, but he was unable to control himself. He detested the fact that she was using the word love carelessly and without regard. The sooner she recognized that her little crush had nothing to do with love, the sooner she could begin to move on with her life and... "Yes," she said, slamming her hands on the table in an unexpected response. "I'm confident that I would be willing to give up my life for you, Sasuke. That's how much you mean to me. It's not just a crush anymore." Not believing her for a moment, he shook his head in frustration. "Really?" He shot back, his voice tinged with resentment. "And what if I told you that I liked another girl now? What if I told you I had already moved on and was dating someone else right now? If you truly loved me and cared about what's best for me, then surely you'd be happy for me and would let me be." Even as he watched her heart shatter, Sasuke kept his gaze fixed on her. Even though it was really unpleasant, he stayed alert and fought the impulse to go comfort her. He had to be firm and determined. By now it was clear that much. She needed to understand that in a relationship, love was more than just a meaningless word. Sakura finally whispered, "I don't believe it," barely loud enough for him to hear. She was obviously struggling with the idea that their story would not end happily ever after. "I don't believe you, and even if you did find someone else Knock, knock. Gurren had picked the right time to arrive at his apartment, for better or worse. He had desired to treat Sakura like a gentleman, but at the moment, he was acting anything but. He approached the door and, this time, verified that it was her by looking through the glass. To irritate her teammate, he had posed as her boyfriend, so she could reciprocate. "Well, there's no need for you to take me at my word, Sakura. 'Cause here she is right now." Naruto with his arms crossed in frustration. Madara stood where he was and spat out a scornful, "Don't try and use your new powers against me, boy. Insult. You don't even know how to use them. Apart from that, you wouldn't have even known about how to unlock them were it not for. Shut up! Screamed Naruto, filled with rage. Even though he was still learning how to use his abilities, he was certain from what his eyes had shown him that this was his world, his subconscious, and his mind. It is his to order. At his very command, chains shot up from the earth and wrapped themselves around Madara. They pulled him violently to his knees as soon as they had covered his body. Naruto strode toward his prisoner, angry and confident in his strength. Madara was defeated by his father. Even though he was one of the strongest ninjas in history, he now had Madara as a prisoner. He was no longer afraid of him. Tell me everything, he ordered, abandoning the attempt to use the spiritual chakra in his eyes after the first attempt failed. Tell me why you used me to kill the Uchiha clan. Why you lied to me, and everything else that you've been hiding from me. Madara was clearly furious, but before he could reply, a great chuckle broke out from the enormous cell behind them, as if the Nine Tails were amused by this lethal circumstance. A voice as deep and full as a mountain uttered the words, Naruto, more terrifying than Naruto had ever heard. Was he being addressed by the Nine Tails? I know you have little reason to trust me, but let me just say this. If you were to kill Madara now, you would likely save the entire world from destruction. Behind the bars, he could just barely make out the enormous form of the tailed beast, but he could see its tails, each bigger than the Hokage's tower, swinging idly in the distance. In contrast, he felt like an ant, and rightly so. The enormous crimson eyes that loomed in the darkness appeared to reflect the faint glow of the nearby lights. He returned his focus to the dangerous prisoner he was holding captive. Murder Madara? Of course he wanted to, but first he wanted to hear Madara's version of events. He desired to gain as much knowledge as possible before deciding what to do next. From his lips will come truth and falsehood interwoven so seamlessly that you could leave here believing the sky wasn't blue. I will not beg of you, for I do not care for the mortals in this world. This is more personal than anything, but I would like for you to throw that vile and hairless monkey into this cage. I'm sure you understand my sentiment, Madara. Naruto gazed down at his erratic prisoner. He said, I may just throw him to you if he decides to continue lying, but he was starting to question whether it was a stupid idea to enrage his prisoner. But Madara has helped me in the past. I need to know the truth. Madara remained silent for a tense moment before opening his mouth to answer. Very well, I will tell you the truth. And I will forgive you for this slight against me only because you are unaware of the effects of the Mangekyo on your emotions. But as I'm sure you're well aware by now, you have already seen everything I have to share with you. Afterwards, when Naruto opened his eyes and emerged from his subconscious, he was confronted by the enormous stone tablet. All he had seen had come to pass. In return for Itachi's Sharingan, Madara had killed the Uchiha clan with his body. Shisui had ultimately made Itachi give Naruto his own eyes, shivering. He seemed to be reopening old wounds that were still having trouble healing. After leaving his own subconscious in disgust and rage, Naruto silently asked out loud in the empty room, why didn't you tell me? Before Madara answered, he already knew the answer. He calmly recited Madara's words, you weren't ready to hear the truth, in his head. I still hadn't thought that you would be ready, and technically you weren't ready. Killing the clan over and over in your trial to unlock the Mangekyo broke you mentally, and your eyes evolved in order to save you. You most likely would have killed yourself were it not for the Mangekyo. That didn't sound good to Naruto. Still speaking in a low voice, he asked incredulously, evolved. The only reason I was able to get through that despicable test was because of my hatred. That's exactly what the Mangekyo is, Naruto. Hatred. Is the Mangekyo hateful? Before posing any questions, he waited for Madara to elaborate. This will be easier to explain after you look at the stone with your Mangekyo. It will also confirm something very important to us. Naruto sighed and glanced up at the enigmatic tablet with his Sharingan activated as Madara started to walk away. He was only able to read about halfway down the stone, where it discussed the ambiguous methods for unlocking the Mangekyo, just like before. He inhaled deeply before getting ready to elevate his eyes. There was more to it than simply hurling a ton of spiritual chakra in his eyes. Although he didn't fully comprehend Madara's meaning of hatred, he did sense the distant presence of wrath within him when he increased the flow of spiritual chakra to his Sharingan. It was Madara's hatred he had hoped for. Now, however, he was aware. He owned it. He felt that power surge up into his eyes as he tapped into it. His whole world darkened, and his eyesight changed as soon as the hatred reached them. His dark emotions actually altered his perception of everything, though not in the sense of actual light. The power that flowed with it was perfectly matched by a burning sense of liquid emotion that pushed through his entire body. As he turned to face the stone tablet again, he was able to see a lot more than he had a minute before. After enumerating the god techniques that Madara had previously described, it began discussing a number of others that he was unaware of. It discussed the power of hatred obtained from the gods, Amaterasu, Tsukuyomi, and all the other techniques. After reading silently for about a minute, Naruto told Madara where he was by reading aloud, Susanoo. Susanoo and Ryujin. It says that I can harness the sea and storms god Susanoo, and the sea and storms dragon Ryujin after furthering my Mangeku's power. Then it starts talking about the exalted gods Izanagi and Izanami, who can change fate itself. Then he kept reading about the inevitability of blindness, even after acquiring these divine abilities and the capacity to alter fate itself. Naruto read aloud in a monotone, "Alone you cannot stop the blinding hatred," adding, "You must seek the equal vision of another, one close enough to be considered your brother." He hesitated, wondering what this could mean. He stopped reading further and asked Madara, "Blinding hatred? Does that mean that I won't be able to think properly while using the Mangekyu? Or does it literally mean that I'm going to go blind, like when you used my eyes before?" Both. It's a clever play with words. The Mangekyu changes the way you think with hatred in order to avoid you going crazy and killing yourself. This hatred will only continue to grow and consume you as you use your powers. Unfortunately, alongside this negative effect, you will also physically go blind as you use the powers. This was a riddle that caused many Uchiha who fell into madness or blindness or both. I found the answer, of course, along with several others in the clan. It's quite obvious, actually. Hesitantly, Naruto swallowed. He hesitated, wondering if this heinous act could truly be the solution. Did you have to kill your brother and steal his eyes in order to gain the next level? Yes, this was perhaps the obvious answer that most people came to first believe. But after already killing someone close enough to them in order to unlock the Mangekyu, most Uchiha were unwilling to take the life of someone else that close to them. Most have to be on the edge of blindness and insanity to even consider going through that pain again. There's also the risk that you guess the riddle incorrectly, and you may kill your brother for nothing. I'm not sure the other person actually has to be your brother. The tablet may be telling us that the person just has to be close enough to you emotionally that killing them would be like killing a brother. Naruto's mind was racing through the terrible predicament he found himself in. He began slowly, returning his attention to the tablet. Then for me, he said. When Shisui ordered Itachi to give me his eyes. Neither Itachi nor Shisui had even read this far on the tablet. They didn't know about it at all yet. That's why when Shisui ordered Itachi to give you his eyes instead, I was quite eager for the possibility that you would have to skip this penultimate trial entirely. You were already given another person's set of eyes, and even better, that person was like a brother to you who already unlocked the Mangekyu Sharingan. It was nothing short of a miracle. We won't know for sure if you have unlocked the next stage of the Mangekyu already, unless you can read past the riddle. After the riddle was over, he was able to read more. Shisui. I can. So, thank your brother. The only other way you could avoid going blind or insane would be if Sasuke unlocked the Mangekyu and you took his eyes. Keep in mind that the tablet states, equal vision, which implies that the other person had to have unlocked the Mangekyu as well. This meant that more than half of those who unlocked the Mangekyu couldn't have evolved it to the next level. In addition, the person from whom you stole it was likely to be as strong as you, knew the riddle, and was close to you emotionally. You possess what is known as the Eternal Mangekyu Sharingan, Naruto, and I venture to say that you are the first of many. It was never unlocked by anyone other than the Uchiha clan until you did. You are the only one who has unlocked it without killing another member of your family. Additionally, you are probably the first person to ever reach this Mangekyu stage at such a young age. However, despite your youth, you have experienced so much grief in life that your Mangekyu was able to awaken in its ideal form right away. The greatest kind of suffering and hatred has been endured by the select few who have ever unlocked the Eternal Mangekyu. They must have been so filled with rage that they were able to murder a loved one at last. In order to help them see past the pain, their Mangekyu then underwent another evolution. What about your brother? Did you kill your own brother because you were so filled with hatred? Naruto asked, his throat dry as he considered what kind of monster Madara was. In fact, Madara was quiet for a while. No, we both learned what the result would be before hatred consumed us. Our strength was equal. That battle would have killed us both. My brother offered to give his life for me and the clan instead of taking the chance of murdering its two most influential members since he knew I was the clan head. For some reason, death results from having your eyes removed after you have unlocked the Mangekyo. I took his eyes and used the agony of his sacrifice to unlock the eternal Mangekyo. Every time, my brother and I read this tablet together. However, I read this next section by myself at last. Without my brother, without my best friend. Only those who have experienced such suffering will ever read this part of the tablet. I know that you've earned it, having been alone in life and then losing the only family you've ever come to know. But remember that this has all been for a cause. You have a great purpose in this world. Read on. As he looked up to read past the eternal Mangekyo's riddle, Naruto was now taking deep breaths to help him relax. He decided to trust Madara. His life's hardships had allowed him to read this far, and they would all provide him with the strength to assist in permanently purging this village of its corruption. Gyatso, the sage of the six paths, the father of all ninjutsu, the wielder of the Rinnegan, and the person who sealed the 10 tails into the moon to prevent the destruction of the world, was mentioned in the tablet. By distributing chakra and converting the holy word into seals that anyone could use, the sage reportedly spread ninjutsu throughout the world with the aid of his brother Hakoda. Regretfully, his children disagreed, so he chose to divide his chakra in two rather than directly select a successor to his immense power. Senju received his physical chakra, while Uchiha received his spiritual chakra. At last, he made it to the final section he could read. Only when my sons can live with peace and love will my power be awakened once again, Naruto read out loud. Naruto could not read the bottom portion of the tablet that remained. That's it, he whispered, squinting his eyes as though reading any more would be easier. But it looks like there's more. Is there another stage of the Mangekyo that's required to read the last part? What does it say? In agreement, Madara's voice chuckled. There is one final stage, as the riddle hinted at. The Rinnegan, the power of the sage of the six paths. That is the power that you will need in order to change the world. Naruto asked, mentally formulating the obvious conclusion. The tablet, or rather the sage, wrote that he split his powers evenly between the Senju and the Uchiha. If his power was the Rinnegan, does that mean that the Senju bloodline is needed to turn the eternal Mangekyo into Rinnegan? The sage split up his power into his two kids. I'm guessing that means that if a Senju and a Uchiha had a kid together, the child would have both the physical bloodline and the spiritual bloodline, forming the Rinnegan. Madara's voice actually sounded like he was laughing aloud in his head this time. Ha, incredible for you to so easily come to that conclusion. When I once stood where you stand now, immediately after unlocking the eternal Mangekyo, that thought had never occurred to me. This was before the Leaf Village had been formed, mind you. The very thought of a Uchiha and a Senju being friends, let alone having a kid together, was so alien to me that it never even occurred to me. I wasted years trying to think of some sort of jutsu that a Senju and a Uchiha might be able to wield together, perhaps in battle, but the answer was far more obvious, as you discovered. There is a bit more for you to learn, but that will come in due time. Sasuke. Late night, Sasuke finally concluded that Sakura could wait until later because the Chunin exam finals were quickly approaching. He certainly wasn't going to waste time thinking about her when they weren't even together if the primary reason he ended their relationship was that she took up too much time for his training schedule. Fortunately for him, Gurren had arrived at the perfect moment to persuade Sakura that they were dating and send the girl with the pink hair crying and fleeing. All right, it was over. So why did it make him feel so bad? Why was Sakura so difficult for him to forget? After learning that Hinata had reportedly been sleeping in Naruto's bed for the past week, he suggested that she wait outside this time before leaving for his apartment. He believed Sakura would be a time-consuming girlfriend, and god. When it came to Naruto, Hinata appeared to be on the edge of losing her mind. At the moment, he was following Gurren down an empty street as they made their way toward the Uchiha compound. While Hinata waited at Naruto's apartment, they had assured her that they would at least look for Naruto in the compound. In any case, he discovered that he truly enjoyed spending time with his Crystal Akatsuki phony girlfriend, and the walk was pleasant and serene. He turned to face her with his hands in his pockets and said, "You know," breaking the quiet silence after a while. "Your team thinks that we're dating. Sakura and Hinata think that we're dating. We go out to eat and take long walks together." He smiled and persisted as she deliberately turned her head away. With his customary undertone of humor, he asked her, "At what point are we actually just dating for real? Literally nothing would change if we decided to." Why are you so against it? He would never have thought that he was genuinely attempting to win a girl over. Particularly since he had recently ended one because it took too much time. Gurren's charisma seemed to be immune to his crystal defense, but girls fell for him with a simple wink and smile. She responded dismissively, I don't know, without trying to provide an explanation. We've already talked about this. And it's not like I like you or anything, idiot. He looked to check if she was kidding. She wasn't. Was the oldest Tsunere line in the book really all she used? He replied coolly, you like me enough to go on dates, and he sighed. Cracking her was going to be difficult. He decided to change the topic and ask, so, what's your job like in Akatsuki, since he was not getting anywhere? You mentioned that you guys don't really have traditional ninja ranks over there. What's your actual rank? This time, she gave him a look that was a mix of irritation and something else. She joked half-heartedly, oh, now you want me to commit treason against Akatsuki. You know that the Amekage doesn't want us to share any information about. Yeah, Sasuke interrupted, waving her away. Far from the festivals, they turned the corner and began walking down another peacefully deserted street. You don't even know if you're going back to Akatsuki or not, remember? Her face sank into sadness, and the atmosphere swiftly became gloomy. Oh no, perhaps he ought to have raised that in a different manner. We'll figure something out, don't worry, he told himself. I just want to know a little bit more about you and what you do. She let out a loud sigh, but after a prolonged period of silence, she actually started to talk more about herself. Akatsuki is broken up into 9 various-sized regiments, all focused on a specific mission and led by incredibly powerful commanders who work directly for the Amekage. I'm in the 2nd Regiment, the Armor Regiment. We specialize in heavy defensive jutsu and are usually paired up with ninja from the Stealth or Ordnance regiments for missions. Beneath the commanders of each regiment are lieutenant commanders who really just get things done on a day-to-day basis while the commander plans various things, goes to meetings and runs exercises. Each regiment is composed of companies run by captains. Captains are really the equivalent of jonin in a regular ninja village. Nodding, Sasuke followed, so what are you then? Do you work in one of the companies or something? She proudly said, I'm a lieutenant commander, but her voice still had a melancholy tone, until I get back at least. He remembered her earlier description, and his eyes widened in surprise. Whoa, really? Didn't you say those were above our jonin equivalents? She gave a nod. Technically they are. But all lieutenant positions are more for day-to-day operations like I said, and we directly work for our commanders. It's more of a management spot. Only the actual commanding positions, like commanders and captains, have to be filled with people who are really strong. That being said, I'm probably at a Chunin Jonin level myself, and I'm the weakest of the lieutenant commanders. Just as they were beginning to get close to the Uchiha compound, Sasuke had an idea. If I remember correctly, you said that you work underneath Kimimaro. Does that mean he's the commander of your armor regiment? She halted her stride and turned to him, her expression worried. Her voice was urgent as she stated, there's no point in hiding it anymore, he is. And the Amekage specifically picked out the commanders for their powers and special abilities. You know who else was a commander? Orochimaru. And you know who is replacing Orochimaru? Sasuke was the one who let his face fall this time. The other day, Gurren informed him that Itachi would be a commander in addition to joining Akatsuki. He now understood the precise meaning of that. Itachi was employed directly by the Amekage, who had judged him to be extraordinarily strong. Eventually, he smiled confidently and said, that just means I'll be able to test my strength against someone who is close to Itachi's strength. If I can't beat Kimimaro, then I'll know exactly how much more I need to train in order to catch up to Itachi. He couldn't afford to become depressed and pessimistic. A few days ago, he had already witnessed how that had worked out for Gurren. He needed to maintain his optimism. If nothing else, he would learn something from this. After a while, they entered the compound and passed the location where Gurren had almost killed her. He had no idea where Naruto might be hiding, but he thought it would be a good idea to start by looking at Naruto's former home. Together, they silently strolled around the compound, searching in vain for Naruto. They didn't truly sense the presence of a strong chakra until they arrived at the far end of the compound, close to the Uchiha's meeting spot. Gurren asked him quietly, you feel that? She had felt the presence herself and was clearly uncomfortable. The chakra had a strong, frightful, and kind of familiar feeling. Sasuke indicated the obvious destination with a nod of agreement. I'm not sure what Naruto would be doing in there, but clearly there's someone in the meeting hall. Let's be careful. As they got closer to the hall's entrance, The chakra's presence grew stronger and stronger, almost as if the person inside wanted to be discovered. What was Naruto doing in there, anyway? Upon opening the doors, they discovered a tall, dark-haired man standing with his back to the door in the middle of the tatami mat room. Sasuke recognized one of the last people he wanted to meet in this place, and before he even turned around, a pit of dread filled his stomach. Orochimaru's all-too-familiar voice said, "Greetings, Sasuke," filling the old Uchiha hall. "And Gurren too, what a pleasant surprise. Naruto left here a little while ago, you must have just missed him. I certainly made an effort to avoid him, but I've been patiently waiting here nonetheless. There's something I would like to say to the two of you. Please, come and have a seat." When Naruto eventually left the Uchiha meeting spot, his mind was aflutter with new information. Instead, he had made the decision to jump as fast as he could over the wall of the surrounding compound. It was time for him to leave this place. His mind was racing with too much. He paused to glance back down at the once magnificent Uchiha clan home before he crossed the wall. Streets were buried under debris, buildings were destroyed, and many of the houses that survived were stained dark red-brown. This was his fault. This clan had been destroyed by him. He had not only Itachi's blood on his hands. When he finally leapt away and began to return to the main area of the Leaf Village, he was genuinely surprised to feel tears of sorrow roll down his face and land on the ground below. He jumped across rooftops as the sun was setting, leaving a trail of tears in his wake. Before leaving the meeting location, he had made a deal with Madara that he would complete his never-ending list of questions later, after he had had time to reflect on what he had discovered so far. Madara had chosen to conclude the conversation by informing him of the Mangeku's core, hatred, rather than responding to his inquiries regarding their abilities. As you are aware, the Sharingan will always change to protect the wielder, and the Mangekyou is the outcome of it shielding you from the most intense and deadly emotional pain that can be experienced with the overwhelming power of hatred. Unless the wielder learns to master it with the eternal Mangekyou, this hatred will eventually consume them. The Mangekyou is unlocked when one experiences the ultimate and deadly emotions of love and hatred. An opposing side exists. The sage was more than just the personification of hatred, he was perfectly counterbalanced by its antithesis. The first Hokage himself is the one who taught me this. What is the antithesis of the intense feeling of hatred? After giving it some thought, Naruto replied, "I'm not sure, my dear." No, remember the last puzzle. Another strong emotion that parallels hatred is love. Since lost love causes the most emotional suffering, keep in mind that Uchiha must first experience love in order to even unlock the Mangekyu. Hatred can easily transform into love, and love can easily transform into hatred. No, peace is the antithesis of hatred, or more accurately, the antithesis of intense emotion. Calm. Does this have anything to do with the importance of stillness that you mentioned prior to the trial? Naruto had inquired, recalling earlier in the conversation. Yes. After mastering perfect peace, the Senju can unlock the ultimate Senju bloodline of Sage Mode. The lack of emotion, hate, and love. Silence. Sage Mode could be activated by a Sage Mode master like Hashirama, who would instantly become motionless and filled with peace. It is clear that Gyatso, the sage of the Six Paths, was an expert in both. He gave the Senju a master of peace and stillness, and he gave the Uchiha a master of hate and love. No matter how hard Naruto tried to gather his thoughts, tears kept streaming down his face as the realization dawned on him. He was a murderer, having killed the Uchiha clan, the same clan that had taken him in like family when everyone else treated him like trash. Naruto was still running across rooftops at a relatively slow pace, trying to process all of the information that had been thrown at him in such a short amount of time. How could he be the lighthouse of peace and justice when it was his own hands that killed the Uchiha? What would Sasuke say to him when he discovered that, even though Naruto may not have been awake when it happened, without a doubt, if it weren't for him, the Uchiha clan would still be alive? Itachi had told him in his visions that it wouldn't have been able to do it alone. What was the point of all his training, of all his suffering? When would Madara take over his body again? Who would be the next to die without his knowledge? Wouldn't the Leaf Village be safer if he was simply dead? Wouldn't that be the first step in exacting revenge on the Uchiha clan? To kill himself and purge the world of the Uchiha's killer? He was a monster. Everyone he loved was in danger while he was alive, and anyone else who would have cared for him had already been killed. He was better off dead. He had previously fallen prey to Madara, who had given in to his hatred and killed off his friends and family in order to obtain the Mangekyu. What was the point? He was a monster. He was a monster. All his life, he just wanted others to respect and acknowledge him, but that was impossible now. He would never respect himself again. They had all been right about him. They had always been right. He was a monster. He landed on a rooftop, fell to his knees, and started sobbing uncontrollably. Shisui had died because of him. Itachi had to kill his best friend and assist in the murder of the Uchiha because of Naruto. A surge of sinister chakra flooded his brain and into his eyes, causing him to gasp and choke on his breath. The Mangekyo Sharingan stopped sobbing and slowly stood up, blinking away the last of his tears and gazing forward at the village with a renewed sense of power and resolve. Perhaps he wasn't completely innocent, but he really wanted to see the council pay for what they had done to him. With his new eyes, he had the ability to change this village. He could determine which council member had ordered Itachi to kill the Uchiha, and he could burn those individuals alive. He wanted to be the solution, and he wanted to be the cleansing agent. If he thought the leaf was terminally corrupt, the entire village would burn. He couldn't help but laugh as he found himself reassured by his negative emotions, which were now directed outwards to everyone else instead of himself. Hatred was the answer to his pain, and the amazing power he had found in the dark depths of his hatred was the solution to all of his problems. The menacing essence that was filling his mind with such thoughts was purely his own chakra. Who could possibly comprehend what he had gone through? Who in the world could be like him, Naruto Uchiha, who had endured days and weeks of the most terrible torture imaginable and emerged stronger than ever before? Who could comprehend his realization that hate was the only thing that kept him alive, the only emotion that gave him the strength to move on? Who could comprehend what it was like to grow up alone and hated, treated by everyone as a monster for the demon that was sealed inside of you, only to prove them correct in the end by murdering those who dared to care for you? Perhaps a week ago, he would have frozen in terror and fear, but this killer intent did nothing to quench the flames of his own sinister hatred. He froze in mid-thought as he felt a presence appear on the rooftop behind him, as if the gods had decided to answer his questions, and a wave of hatred and killer intent similar to his own washed over his entire body like a tsunami. A dark voice behind him said, "You've changed," and it was the same voice he had heard before taking the Chunin exam's first test. He whirled around and fixed the one who dared to approach him with his hypnotic crimson eyes of black fire, which matched the pale green eyes of the one person who might not recoil at his own surge of murderous intent. What better way to learn his new abilities than to practice on an actual foe? "Hey," Naruto said to his fellow genin, pushing more chakra up to his eyes and subduing Madara at the same time. "Gaara of the desert, to what do I owe the pleasure?"
I will continue the story in next part. Till then, we weeb offline.